It's not nothing what a dog can become. But it doesn't just happen. It's not, we all know lots of misbehaved dogs. Maybe they were abused or neglected or whatever. This is a very important point. The realization of potential is not inevitable. Most, acorns don't become oaks. But that potential is concrete. Somebody has the potential to become this and not a that. So we talked about Appleseed, talk about the puppy. Apples are not uncomplicated, try gardening if you haven't done it, It's like, all right, it's work. It takes ingenuity. You got to know what you're doing. Then go to the puppy, more complicated, but you get the point. It has a potential that it needs certain conditions. Well, let's now move up to the baby, the human child. It's another whole level of complexity because compared to a dog, what does it have? It has a self-aware agency, a self-conscious agency that its own nature requires it to realize. So you can't have a human being that just can become fully itself while always only being told what to do. It has to become an actually actively self-determining entity. Well, how do you do that?
Okay. Stephen, it's so good to see you again.
It's great to be back. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Last time we spoke was May or June on the farm at Okefenokee. Mm-hmm. We had a really in-depth, fascinating philosophical conversation after some food there. Right? We had lunch together.
We had the food after.
Yeah, the food after.
Both very memorable.
Yes. It was just a really good conversation. And I knew then, I was like, got to get you on the show. So it's great to have you here. We were just talking offline about the summer program you guys do at Ralston College. And so we're going to get into like a lot of philosophical stuff here, but I wanted to start with that because I just think it is one of the coolest things I have ever heard of. I really wish senior me in college had known about this program. So if you could just tell us a little bit about like what that is, what the students do, and about the philosophical immersion that they undergo.
Sure. Well, let me say it's a privilege to be on the show. Thanks very much for having me. Maybe the first thing I'll say is that before I describe the program is just that, when you're building anything new, anything, you've kind of got to ask, well, why are we doing this and what makes it valuable? And, in the whole landscape of higher education, there's any number of things you might say we could try and build and do. But I think our key metric about, whether something's worth doing is something like, what is the program? Put it two ways. What is the program that when I was that age, I would have given anything to do?
Yeah.
And the fact is, when you get that answer right, you'll be in the situation that I and most of our team members are in, which is like, oh man, if I could only do this now.
Yeah, right.
And so, I think, it's easy to think about education as if, it's this, I don't know, copy these lines out from the blackboard or, okay, go and do your homework and all this sort of thing. If you just think, well, no, what would it mean if we optimize this for something that was self-evidently of the greatest value and adventure? So that's kind of the way we thought about it. And I'll tell you the story about how it actually came about. And we maybe go back over some of these things,
sure.
But it was a long time coming. We maybe won't talk about why a new college and the long 15 years that we spent.
Feel
but
free.
we can get into all of these things. But I'll tell you, when we got the transformative funding after that long journey, about which there's much to be said, about what the barriers to entry were, how we took a thing from zero, literally nothing, and built it into a college. It was, we didn't start with any money, any worldly contacts to speak of. So that's a kind of an interesting story of grit and ingenuity and luck and generosity and kindness from unexpected quarters. And so that's an interesting story. But when after this long journey, that's the stage I'm trying to set, we received from a really visionary and courageous and really inspiring man, and the trust that he supports with his resources. the transformative funding to launch this college that we'd been working for 15 years to bring into being, we knew that it was going to be a one-year master's program. We knew that we wanted to start with something that we could iterate year over year. We could learn our lessons quickly. That was not, multi-year complexity. We wanted to do it at the graduate level because people are a little more mature at that point, so you need less logistical sort of supporting structures than you do for, say, an 18-year-old, at an earlier stage of development. So we knew we wanted a one-year graduate program. We knew it was going to be in the humanities, broadly conceived, because that's where areas of strength were, and that was the domain we'd already decided that we could have the greatest impact in. We knew it would be an integrated course. It wasn't going to be just philosophy or just literature or just art. We're going to aim to integrate the various domains of human inquiry.
An actual university.
Well, imagine if you could do that. So we knew all of that. We also knew that when we received if we had the privilege of actually doing this, that there was a man that I had come to know that we really wanted to hire. And his name is Joseph Conlon. And he had been introduced to me as he was just over 30, I think, when I met him, 32 or something, as one of the finest philologists in the world. Now, philology is just Greek for the study or the love of language or words.
Right.
And so it means someone who's an expert in learning languages, teaching languages, history of languages, how they work, and so on. Got to be kidding me. 32, one of the finest in the world. And the best way I can describe this guy is he's kind of like SEAL Team 6 meets the classics. He's an absolutely remarkable man into the martial arts and has the highest level of accomplishment as a scholar. He'd been to Princeton. He has very interesting stories himself about how he came to learn. He's a very humble person, doesn't hold himself out as anything special at all. Anyway, I had seen this guy in action, actually in Greece, teaching Greek one summer with an institute called the Paideia Institute. And I thought, when you see something that is just on fire.
Raw talent.
And so I thought, this is a man, and there were other talents that we were hoping that we would be able to bring on the team, and did bring on the team. But I'm trying to tell the story of the Greek program, how that came about. And, he tells, and, maybe you'll have him on sometime, and he'll tell you about his story. But effectively, his story about learning languages is that he started learning Greek and Latin in college. He's very hard worker, pushed very hard, got his grammar books out. For years, he was studying Greek. And after a couple of years of college and working really hard, he decided to take up Russian. And as part of his Russian studies, he took some Russian course or two, and then he went to Russia for 3 months or 6 months or whatever. And by the time he finished that in-person period in Russia, as you can imagine, his Russian was getting pretty good. He could read Dostoevsky and Pushkin or whatever, and maybe perhaps not totally fluently, but was getting pretty handy at the language. Both orally, verbally, written, read, etc. And he came back and looked at his Greek and was like, "What the heck? Like, I've been studying this language for longer than I've been studying Russian, and yet my Russian is way better than my Greek is. What's going on there?" And that was the beginning in his story, which again you may ask him about sometime. Realizing that the way that the ancient languages are taught today is totally incongruent, totally at odds with the way that we actually learn our own mother tongue, and that we typically learn other languages. If you want to learn, German, you want your daughter to learn German, you'll probably send her to live with a German family, and when she's 19 years old in a village that doesn't speak any English, if you can find that. Or French, or whatever the language may be. And that immersion brings out it's easy to learn. Anyway, point I'm making here is that it actually turns out that for most of human history, the ancient languages of Greek and Latin were taught just like, you would teach German or French, immersively, the same way you learn your own language. Your mom says hot when she points at the stove, in context, immersively. And so it turns out when you teach a language that way, you can go way further than,
Right.
this I learned from a book and this word means this and
Yeah.
this means that. And I'm looking at it like it's a kind of decoding computer,
Yeah.
program at every level. That's not how we learn our language. That's not how we speak or understand language.
Right.
You say this word and I don't think that means that. You just know what it means because of the context and your fluency. So all of that is to say,
Almost like playing the card game versus reading the book about how to play the card game.
yes.
You just pick it up more quickly.
Yeah,
playing.
no, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So when you try to learn a language without the benefit of all of that, immersive context, you're using just a small percentage of the bandwidth and of the cognitive structures and abilities
Right.
your brain has for learning language. So you're leaving most of your talent on the table.
Right.
Imagine trying to play basketball, but you can't use your feet or something like that. It's you're just maladapted to purpose. Anyway, I don't want to get into the weeds there. What I want to say is that this was the context on this fellow. Now, of course, it goes without saying that if you want to engage seriously with Western civilization, you need to be able to look at the things written in those languages. And this is a point that we don't want to gloss over, because today most people think, well, you don't need to have any Greek or Latin or any languages at all. It's all out there. It's all in translation. The fact of the matter is, you cannot sustain or transmit a civilization with direct access to the things it is about. And one of the mechanisms, not the only one, but one of the absolutely essential mechanisms that has sustained Western civilization, and it's true of any other civilization, but has sustained Western civilization throughout history, is that people were able to, not everyone, granted, that's true, but engage directly with the things that had inspired, sustained, and given rise to that civilization. So all that is to say, we wanted to hire this guy, and I said, well, I should also say background, that I had worked in educational travel for a number of years, and I had experiences of frankly taking people around to the great sites of Europe, and I'd seen how inspiring. I was just a farm boy from Prince Edward Island, Canada. I didn't travel to Europe until well into graduate school. My travel as a kid was limited to a house swap we did with a family that had that lived on a lake, and we loved that week. But the point I'm making is that I had the privilege in my mid-20s. I was so hungry to travel and see the world, of getting a job as a tour guide over the summer, and I've gotten to see these things that I had only dreamed of in my life. And I found that going to the source of these things that I was downstream of, whether you want to talk about my understanding of Christianity, or the architecture I grew up with, or the customs and traditions. Well, what was the source of these things? Where had they come from? And so it's a little bit like opening up the adventure of the background. You fall in love with something, and then you get to know that woman, or you know your dad, obviously, because you grew up with him, but imagine you didn't know your grandfather, but then you get the chance to meet him. And you're like, oh, I got all these things I wanted to understand about where my dad came from, or where his father or mother or whatever it may have come from. So all that is to say that we knew that in order to have a really living, deep relationship with this content, let's just call it this, these treasures of the past, we had to have access to them. It's like trying to look at reading a book with the lights off.
Yeah.
And so I said to my colleague, Joseph, I said, this is crazy. I said, but do you think we could actually take people to Greece? We hadn't even founded the college yet. It was just starting out. We never had a student. And he said, well, it'd be wonderful. Greece is an inspiring place. You can imagine doing all kinds of things. I said, okay. And we're trying to look at the budgets and figure out how you work it out. And I said, well, how about a couple weeks? What if we did a couple weeks? And he said, it's always wonderful to go, but realistically, if you want to teach in that time, it doesn't matter how many hours a day you push people. You can't learn that much in 2 weeks.
Sure.
And so I said, well, what about 3 weeks? Or maybe 4? 5? And he said, listen, Stephen, let me tell you something. Almost everyone I know who's tried studying ancient Greek considers their study of ancient Greek a failure. They studied it for years, but they still can't read it. They could read it a bit, but now they forgot it. They never really mastered it. It was a story of failure. And he said, I think it's immoral to teach anything in a way that makes someone feel that way. And so if we're going to do this, let's really do it. And his metaphor for what it means to really do it is a metaphor. Actually, this was before Musk had launched the rocket ships, but it's a metaphor of rocket launch or satellite launch. If you imagine, you see those spaceships take off, it takes an enormous amount of energy to get that thing up into the atmosphere. And if you get almost through it, but not quite, you fall back down to Earth. You got to start all the way over.
Right.
But once you're up, it takes very little energy to orbit.
Yes.
And so he said, the goal has to be that we give people enough
escape velocity.
They get actually into orbit.
Yeah.
And so that was how we started out with the idea that we would have
a great metaphor.
We'd have a Greek program. And what does the program look like? When students are admitted to the program, of course, it's a year long, but it starts in Greece and they get something of a James Bond letter. This is your mission, should you choose to accept it. Meet us at the foot of the Parthenon at 5 p.m. on such and such a day. Got to find your own way over. Oh, by the way, do this big bunch of work before you get there. And so that's how the adventure starts. The cohort assembles at a given location in Greece. And over the course of the next 2 months, a number of things happen. The first is that we invite them to work extremely hard. We believe in taking our students seriously. And I think what that means is that you create the conditions for them to go the maximum distance they have the capacity to go. We consider that we have failed if not the hardest thing, one of the hardest things every single one of our students has ever done. Because that's an index that we're keeping them at the limit of their abilities. And that therefore they will go as far as they can versus like, why would you waste a year of someone's life and they get here when they could have gotten here?
Sure.
So we push them extremely hard, immersive learning of the language, 10, 12 hours a day. But that's not the only thing that happens. Because we could do that in Savannah very well. We take them to Greece for let's say for 3 reasons. The first is because immersively you learn the language faster, though, as I say, we could do that, create the conditions of doing that in Savannah. The second is because you get to encounter these places that are at the origin of the ideas and ideals of our whole civilization. And the third is, you might say, it's a consequence of that. I see you have a book of Plutarch on your bookshelf behind you, Robert, and there's a phrase of Plutarch that has been enormously inspiring to me. We talked about education as do your homework approach. Plutarch has a phrase, he says, the mind is not a vessel to be filled, like crammed full of things, but a fire to be lit. And we take our students to Greece because it lights them on fire. They come back knowing themselves. We're talking about an age of alienation, which people don't know where they are, when they are. Can I even trust my neighbor? I don't go online. Young people not having sex, not getting graduate, driver's licenses because of the high risk of activities. We're living in a time of dislocation and alienation, broadly speaking. That's at the heart of the meaning crisis. One of the reasons we take people to Greece is because we want to connect them with their home. And that's not just, you're in the West, so you should go back to the West. It's like, no. What are the ideals that you as a human being can lay claim to?
Yeah.
And how it's a little bit like you think you're a pauper, you're in poverty, you got no money, no assets, no net worth, nothing. And someone taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, we just got word, your long lost great uncle died and left you $5 billion. It's something like that, taking a young person to Greece and you're like, wait, you mean this whole tradition, all this language, this beauty, this architecture, these ideals, this challenge to my possible future, it's all mine, just as it's everyone else's. So we go to Greece. The first month is in the island of Samos, which is where Pythagoras.
That is also a great metaphor. Just the treasury of knowledge and techne and episteme, all of the inheritance we have from our ancestors. We often fail to appreciate that. Like the common example I like to share is like, just go stand in front of your refrigerator and marvel that you have a device that can keep calories stable in a cold box or a frozen box in the case of a freezer for months, years. That's amazing. That is actually amazing. And you didn't do anything. I mean, you may have bought the refrigerator, but you didn't invent the refrigerator. And so we all like participate in and enjoy all of this inheritance of knowledge. And so when you were saying like discovering that inheritance, like you might actually be broke and think, oh, I don't have any money, but it's like you are living in the greatest time in human history. Like it's as good as it's ever been. I mean, sure, we have our challenges, we have our own issues, as every age does, but technologically, standard of living, world population, all of these things are as good as they've ever been. So it's so important to remind people of that.
It's certainly a stance of gratitude.
Yes.
Something we may discuss here a bit later too, but a stance of gratitude is essential, I think, to rightly positioning yourself in the world.
Yes.
It's a hard lesson and one I easily forget, to be frank. But because it positions you both as, first of all, you're a receiver of these things.
Right.
But then it also shows you become aware of the value of this thing that you did nothing to earn.
And inspires you to become a giver, I think, too. Right?
I think that's the other side.
You want to pay it forward. Yeah.
So, I won't say much more other than that, the program goes for 2 months. It starts on the island of Samos, where Pythagoras is from. The students make a trip, hike up to Pythagoras' cave, where he first taught his students, his disciples. It's the island of Epicurus. They swim in the Sea of Homer. We make a trip to Patmos, where the words of the book of Revelation were inspired to St. John. They go to Ephesus, and then on the Peloponnese to Delphi and Mycenae, the land of Homer, and all sorts of other places. And all the while pushing extremely hard in their mastery of Greek. But then finally, and not least in some respects, it's most importantly, they become friends with those they are going on this great adventure, summiting this mountain with. And so by the time they conclude those 2 months, the fire is burning very bright in them, but also in their relation to each other. And so the cohort, the group of students, comes to the rest of the program, which we could maybe talk about later, which is in Savannah for the remaining 7 months of the year. The next 3 of the 4 quarters are there, and some comes to their exams at the end of the year in May. But I say all of that because the program that you asked me to describe is this very immersive beginning point that is meant to connect our students directly. I mean, I think we infantilize young people.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look through history, I mean, William Pitt the Younger was, Prime Minister of England at 22? I mean, John Keats was dead by the time he was 28? I mean, every young person should be brought to imagine and to know that there's a horizon of greatness that only they can reach. That doesn't mean everyone's going to be John Keats or Bach or Churchill or whatever, but it does mean that if you depress the perceived value, if I can put this way, of the asset of the subject, by teaching the person that they're not worth anything, or there's no role they could fulfill, or there's nothing they could do until they're much older, what you're doing is you're squandering the capital, which is of infinite value, not only to all of us, but to them and for their realization, precisely because you've closed down in advance the possibility of their realization. So I suppose what we're really trying to do, it has nothing to do with Greek. I mean, yes, I fully believe that we need to have people who have access to these languages because otherwise we can't access our own past. It's like not being able to, it's like trying to build the house, you don't know the blueprints or something like that. But ultimately for the student, it's about awakening in them through this very great challenge, their direct relation to what is highest and best.
Beautiful. Wow. This is why I get so excited when I hear you talk about that. It's so effing cool. And it's like, that is the idea of the university, right? In its purest form, is to take that asset of youth that you're describing, right? We all only get it once, and you're just bursting with energy and intelligence. Like, you're coming online as a person and channeling yourself, right, in a direction. It's, you start to kind of, the university is to expose you to the universals, essentially, and then allow you to then choose a path to kind of really specialize in. But somehow the modern university has just become just the specialization part, right? Like, we still have, the minutest sense of kind of universal education. We still get mathematics in school and whatnot, but, we don't talk about, we didn't read Euclid's Elements, for instance, something like very foundational geometric text, but also teaches you how to think from axioms and deduce. And so, like, there's all these fundamental things we've just completely lost in modern education.
Definitely.
And so I love that you guys are just basically taking the hard zig over here, just zigging this direction and be like, let's go back to the roots. And then tying in the whole idea of immersion, the communitas with other people, like, you're immersing them in the reality of the origin story, not just reading it in a book, but you're actually putting them in the place. And there's something magical about that, probably something beyond even our own understanding, that those places have a life of their own or a memory of their own. And to immerse yourself in that it's more than education. It's like, I don't know what the word is, but, again, I say this as someone who hasn't been. I've been to some of these places. I haven't been to Samos, but I've been to a lot of the Greek islands. And, there's certain churches and mosques that I've entered, and you can tell, you can feel the energy in the walls, right, of everything that's transpired there. So there's something to that. And it's just, I think it's beautiful that you guys are doing this. So you kind of blended this in, but I guess it's worth asking, like, what was the breaking point for you? Some probably a moral, spiritual breaking point of like, hey, the modern university has failed or is failing, at least in certain respects. We need to do something different. Like, what was that breaking point for you? And you don't have to go too deep into the origin story, but like, I want to hear about like the motivation behind it, because then I think that gets into who you are as a person, and then that'll lead us into further philosophical discussion.
Sure. I suppose maybe just a few things worth briefly sketching. Institutionally, I'd had experiences of both the good and the bad. So I'd had some wonderful teachers, and let's say there were vestiges of what a university or a college should be at the places I had the privilege of being educated, but also, deep and systemic problems. And so, you could sort of
same here. By
you
the
could
way.
sort of see both the decline, but also what it had been. There was enough light still on what. So, at a kind of marketplace dynamics level, you might say that the insight that we came to was that it would be easier, faster, and cheaper to found new institutions of higher education. Though it turns out, I can tell you, it's not easy or fast or cheap, than it would be to try to reform institutions from within. Because you might say, well, why not just, pull some levers here and tweak this and tweak that? And I'm all in favor of that. Like, I think it's nihilism to give up on the institutions we all know and love. And yet, I think we also have to be really honest with ourselves about what can be done and on what kind of a time horizon. I mean, people have been talking about the problems in higher education in this country for nearly 100 years, depending on where you look, longer than that. But there's a very significant, easily traceable stream of commentary in the United States going back well beyond, but let's just take 74 years ago or so. William F. Buckley's God and Man at Yale, that's written in the early 50s. Closing American Mind, Alan Bloom, 1985. That's 40 years ago this year. So we're talking about very trenchant, clarion calls to action about the massive problems, and yet, what have we managed to do in that time?
Make it worse.
It's got, I think the evidence is that despite our efforts, it has gotten much worse.
Yeah.
And so, our analysis was you don't have to give up on the places internally, but you also shouldn't be captive to the status quo as the limit of what you're allowed to do.
That's right.
And I think the paradox of continuity actually is birth and rebirth. And so actually tradition, it's interesting to note as an aside, the word tradition comes from the Latin verb tradere, which just means to pass on, like to hand over. It's like a baton in a race.
Right.
Like I'm carrying it, now I'm giving it to you.
Yeah.
So actually the idea that tradition is this kind of ossified, coercive, steel bar that you're going to be, beaten with until you conform. That's the opposite of what it is. It's actually an inherently dynamic, creative, innovative thing. It's more like thinking like, how do we get this ball down the field rather than it is, we have to do it this way. It's like, no, how do we keep this fire burning?
Yes.
From one generation to the next. And so level of market analysis thought, no matter how much money you have, the fact of the matter is you cannot bring about meaningful change at any well-established institution because the culture, the curriculum,
inertia,
the faculty and staff, it is what it is. And they can be self-determining, and they are. I mean, why should you be able to change those? But that's what they are. And so our analysis was that the most powerful intervention would be through innovation and starting things new. And it's not a new idea, obviously. I mean, if you look at the sheer number of institutions of higher education in the United States, depending on how you count, for-profit, nonprofit, 2-year, 4-year, et cetera. But it's like in the ballpark of 4,000 or so institutions. If you do the numbers on that, mostly founded, between the 19th and early 20th century, that means that we were, new colleges were being founded at a pace of something like one every other week for a century and a half.
Wow.
So we're actually living in a time that is historic. Now people think, why would you start that? Why would you do that? No one ever does that. Well, that's a historically anomalous position. And I think actually that holds the answer to why that's one of the reasons we're in a state of stasis culturally with respect to the transmission or vibrant life of our own cultural tradition, is because we don't understand any longer what it takes to pass it on. So that's the first point. Second point I would say is, I suppose I did mention briefly, but I had some pretty clear firsthand accounts of the problems and the difficulties of fixing those problems from within higher education. We could spend a lot of time talking about what those problems are in terms of cost, in terms of ideology and indoctrination and activism, in terms of the infantilization of the student, in terms of the vocationalization of the university. These are, people have written books on all of these. We could talk about those, but fundamentally we thought the best way to solve any stagnant, solution-resistant problem is through a kind of innovation that takes a different approach.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I would say that I have come to think that we're at a breaking point in the history of our own civilization. I have come to think that everything really is at stake. Of course, we don't know the future, but though I share your optimism in many respects about our current status, I think in other respects, the situation is dark. And that's not to say I'm not optimistic we can improve it, but it is to say that I think our status quo with respect to education, with respect to many aspects of whether and to what extent we have the conditions for human flourishing, for people to live meaningful lives, are not remotely what they should be. And my own conviction is that education, it's not the only solution to these things, but it is one absolutely critical piece of what is required. And so finally, I would say that, so there's a civilizational, cultural demand or necessity that we innovate in order to maintain or preserve or improve. Imagine that. I'll give my right arm for that argument about, the best intervention in a stagnant space being innovation and, Schumpeterian creative destruction. I believe that wholeheartedly, Robert. But that's not a human reason, in a sense, to do something. That's a structure. It's a bet on what the structures are. I think that bet is accurate. But the thing that really moves me is the lives of young people. And that's as real as anything gets. And my own view is that there are millions of young people, and not only young people, but let's just take the young people, who do not have the tools to live the lives that they have the potential to live.
That's right.
And so to make it, kind of concrete, it's like you have people knocking at your door, proverbially, emaciated, hungry, starving, saying, give me something to eat. And you can say, screw you, go down to the food bank that we both know doesn't have any food. But you ultimately have a responsibility at that level, an inalienable, non-delegable responsibility, actually, as a human being in relation to others. And I think, as a culture, we are failing our young people. And you can always come up with excuses. Oh, well, this and that, and I don't know what to do. And could you really do anything? And how would you ever change things? You can always be, in a way, pessimistically surrendered to the status quo. But our conviction was that it was at least worth giving everything we had to try to do something beautiful and meaningful, to build from first principles and see if it would stick, to set about seeing if we could create an experience, a product, a community, a college that, though nothing will be without its imperfections, and I'll be the first to acknowledge that, but that would aim to provide an experience that would be positively transformative, that would give to the young people who had the privilege of being there, to the best of our ability, the tools to realize their own potential, and thereby to be able to do that for others. So that's how we came about trying to set upon this, very long and complicated, in a way difficult journey, but one which has borne such rich reward for the privilege of working with the young men and women that we've had the fortune to call our students.
Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. What if I told you that you could lower your tax bill and stack Bitcoin at the same time? Well, by mining Bitcoin with Blockware, you can. New guidelines from the Big Beautiful Bill allow American Bitcoin miners to write off 100% of their mining hardware investment in a single year. That's right, a 100% write-off. So if you had $100,000 of income or capital gains, you could write off that entire amount by investing it in Bitcoin mining hardware. Blockware's mining as a service allows you to start mining Bitcoin right now with minimal effort. Blockware handles everything from securing the miners to sourcing low-cost energy to configuring the mining pool. They do it all. You can stack Bitcoin at a discount every day and save big when tax season comes. So you can get started today by going to mining.blockwaresolutions.com/breedlove. Again, that's mining.blockwaresolutions.com/breedlove. It's a beautiful mission and more necessary than it's ever been, probably. It does seem like we've moved, broadly speaking, the right direction for a long period of time now, right? Since the Enlightenment. But we've kind of we've lost something in the past 50 or so years. And we won't go into all the contributing factors. We focus a lot on corruption of money and all that, which I do think is a big contributor, but I think there's a lot, and it's a multifaceted problem, hard to diagnose exactly what the causes are, but innovation, entrepreneurship, getting back to basics, going back to what worked for a really long time. Like, these tend to be useful strategies for dealing with the meaning crisis, broadly speaking. I want to zero in a little bit though. What is it? I guess this is kind of a two-part question. Take it whichever way you want. The modern university has lost its purpose. You could say lost its soul, perhaps, if we were going to metaphorize it that way. Why? Like, what's going on with the modern university? And then you mentioned these conditions for, human self-realization, human flourishing. What are those conditions? Like, what, if we had to zero in on them and really try to consciously cultivate them, what would they be? What would the action steps be?
Well, on the university, there are lots of things that could be said, but I think broadly speaking, it's as with any complicated thing, it's multifactorial. There's a lot of different causes, and you can interpret it in terms of the role of the government and student loans, which has a positive and a negative effect, but it's really messed up the economics. You can look at what I call the infantilization of students. You're treating them like babies, effectively. That's where you get a lot of this kind of sort of coercive, moralizing culture. It should be a place of unbelievable expectation. I mean, Newton went to university, okay? Went to Trinity College in Cambridge. It should be a place that can recruit and attract that kind of talent and put them in a place for unfettered exploration, conversation, correction. It should be it should be the most badass place for the realization of serious intellectual talent. That's what it should be. And so you can't have that if you're going to, you couldn't say that. You can't, what? You can't prove that the earth is round if you're not allowed to say, you know what, guys, I'm not sure about. That's why absolute, it has to be an absolute rule that you can contest anything. Now, how you do that productively is an interesting question, because it's not all about just coming in here, saying unsupported, ridiculous things. That's not productive either. But you have to be able to challenge anything. You can approach this from the point of view of the fact that the universities have had to become places of job training because of their cost and the role they play at this moment in American and not just American history. But I'll make 2 points about that very quickly. The first is that this is not the role that universities historically have played. I mean, the idea that you should have to go to school as in K to 12, when you're before 18, go to school. People didn't do that. Yeah, that's like a very recent thing. I mean, the elite mostly taught themselves that were taught at home. Some people went to monasteries. Other people went into the guilds. Typically the home was the place of education insofar as you got some education. So the idea that you even went to school, that's a very modern, and fundamentally, I think it's a largely, I'm getting excited here. I was going to say it's a largely failed experiment, but we can discuss to what extent it's been a successful one. But then the idea that you'd have to go to university to get a job. I mean, this pathway that we've sketched out. I mean, just remember that no one before, let's call it, the 19th century, in the whole history of human accomplishment, went through that pathway.
Right.
You know, J.S. Bach, Dante, Alexander the Great, Jane Austen, or whatever. None of those people had a formation like that. Napoleon, whatever. Choose whoever figures you like. So what I'm saying is that what that tells us, and this will lead us to this whole conversation about what are the conditions for human realization. Let's just accept out of the gate as a historic fact that the system we try to force nearly everyone into did not exist in the past, which actually means it was not necessary, at least for the realization of those great talents. And I'd go a step further and say, to be a bit provocative and, a little saucy, I admit, might the coercive universality of that system actually be the reason that no one can point to me the Bachs and the Churchills and the Jane Austens? Now, I'm not saying that, of course, the talent has to be out there. It has to be statistically as present as it's ever been present.
Sure.
But have we perhaps gotten worse? Not as our, let's call it contemporary presentist prejudice would have it, way better at realizing talent. It may be that at least in certain respects we've gotten worse at it. And so that is to pertain to the vocationalization of university. One could say any number of other things. I think it's a complicated enough story that there are different factors present in different ways. But what you get is a system that on the whole, and I'm not a catastrophist, there are good, there's certainly good pockets, there's certainly wonderful people teaching. But if you look at it as a pocket as a whole, you have regulatory, financial, and missional, vocational, both systemic and case-by-case situations that have proven to be both resistant to reform and, I would say, all too often fail in one degree or another, and very often very badly, to provide the value that institution is fundamentally meant to provide. So much for the problems of the university, much more could be said. But actually, it's always important to diagnose these things, but ultimately it's really ultimately only of limited interest, I think, to me, because critique is important because it enables you to understand problems. But we've had a lot of ink spilled about these problems. I'm much more interested in the question of what we can do about these things than I am in either the mere diagnosis or, at worst, the grift that often
because
takes place
fundamentally,
around diagnosis.
it's just like it doesn't work for an increasing number of people, right? It's not working. And so you could kind of leave it at that almost without getting any deeper into the diagnosis.
But then what we don't want to do, you might say, is then throw up our hands and say, oh, well, there's nothing we could do. But I think that leads to the much more interesting question, which is the question is, what are the conditions for the realization of human potential?
Yes.
And that's obviously that's the vastest of vast questions. Yeah. But I'd love for us to spend some time traversing that territory together. But maybe just a couple of, let's say, starting premises. The first is that human beings are different at the individual level. In fact, to the extent that every individual is different from any other individual, there is a unicity that is present. And at some level, it's a defining feature. It's not like they're all mostly the same, but there's these tiny little shades of difference that don't really matter. It's
really different.
None of us believes that about ourselves. It's like, no. The thing that I'm here to do and have the chance of doing through my talents and suffering and virtues and time and place in the world, I like to say to young people that you, in the whole history of the universe, past, present, and future, you are the only person who has the opportunity to live your life. And in fact, in that sense, you owe it to the rest of us to take that and make the most of it. But it's not it doesn't. No, there's only one of these. There's only one. And there's a sense in which that something of the awareness of that, call it the preciousness, the infinite value in its uniqueness, has to be a bedrock of our analysis of what the realization of potential means, because it has to mean we are optimizing, let's call it the culture, the system, whatever we want to call it, for the realization of individuals as particular.
Yes.
And that means that there will be no one size fits all, step-by-step thing. There may be rules of thumb, there may be structures that are generally formative, but I think we have to say, okay, human beings are different, number one. Number two, human beings are the same. And what does that mean? It means that we actually do share a fundamental nature. And I know it's unpopular, all the nihilists and the reductivists, materialists, reject that in one form or another. But my contention is that human nature is a thing. It is in part biological. We all know that. Well, as denied as that has been by insane people in recent years, there is such a thing as an objective nature to the human, as a biological entity, a nature that has a biological reality. But it's also a spiritual or conscious one. That is to say that human beings have evolved as self-conscious creatures. That's a fact of evolution. What does it mean? It means that the fact that we think about ourselves and we evaluate ourselves, and we think, well, I did the wrong thing, or my life doesn't feel very meaningful, or I love that, I'm aware that I love that person, or I want to do these things. That level of consciousness, all I'm saying is, that is a defining feature of human nature that cannot be reduced simply to a biological account, not adequately or accurately. And so what that means is that if we could successfully, let's say we did all the things we needed to do to create the pathways that would enable the realization of the potential of this infinitely diverse range of people, it would look something like each individual fulfilling their unique potential to the very limit of its potential. I often say, like, what does a human being look like? Just to throw this out there. What does it look like for a human being to be fully realized? Like, let's take a couple of metaphors. I love metaphors of, like, okay, let's take a horse in full flight, like, at full gallop. Just like imagine that in your mind, and like, that's a horse. That's a horse giving it, like, realizing this incredible beast that it is in a way that only it can do. Imagine a bird in full flight, or take it. Imagine someone that, like, we all know this for people we love, right? Like, we know, like, what it means for them to, like, be themselves, or to be in a space where it's like, man, that's my brother Ben over there. Man, no one in the world is like that. But we also know what it means when they're in a situation, whether of their own design or others, in which they've betrayed or frustrated that potential.
That's right.
And, like, that's one of the saddest things when someone you love is like distant from what they could become. But let's just imagine that, here I've gone on to this long thing. We have the premises.
Excellence? Is it excellence? Because that's what kept resonating with me, is like you're pushing these adaptations to their absolute limit, and somehow there is beauty there, that we are actually doing what we are designed to do to its fullest, so much that we're pushing the design further. And that can be biological or cultural for humans.
Well, I think that it does have to do with excellence, and it may be that you have a God-given or, biologically assigned, everyone understand this, ability that, like, no one else in the world has had to, I don't know, play the piano or, or, I don't know, theoretical physics. But it may be that, you don't have anything spectacular like that. But damn it, if you are not just as, living under just as profound an obligation to give everything you've got in your unique, because actually the bottom line is we don't ultimately know. This is a big misconception of our time. We don't know where the value is going to turn out to be.
That's right.
And so you could say, oh, well, there's these spectacular people, Alexander the Great or Churchill or whatever. But it's like, well, hold on. What about his mom?
That's right.
Or what about the person that enabled them to become that person, their teacher? Or what about the example they had of, I don't know, the simple
one teacher they had, perhaps.
Person, I don't know, praying in church that inspired. So the point of the matter is we actually don't know. The system is so infinite, is of such infinite complexity that even our own calculations about, well, we need that person because we don't actually know how it works out. So all that is to say, the premises would be we're unique. Another premise, we're the same. Yeah. What the realization or full realization of potential is going to look like is going to have to answer both of those things. Yeah. Both the diversity and the range of pathways because we're different, but it's going to have to yield human beings living to the fullest of their potential in of what is an ultimately shared nature. So that's going to look like, a meaningful life. So then the question is, well, what are those conditions? And see, the thing is, human beings are quite complex creatures. So let's take another metaphor. Let's take, you got some apple seeds. You want to have an apple orchard. And you know that these apple seeds could become an orchard. Okay, so how do you do that? Well, you need to know something about the nature of apple trees. You need to know where to plant the seeds, what kind of soil they need, what kind of rainfall, maybe other nutrients, what kind of sun exposure, what kind of cross-fertilization, how to prune them. Point I'm making is that you can't so much as grow and realize the potential of an apple seed into an apple tree without knowing something about apples. And, let's take something more complex than apples or acorns or whatever. Let's take a little puppy you bring home. Well, that puppy is potentially like these things have a nature. Like the apple seed can't become an oak tree, right? The puppy can't become a falcon, right? But it can become all the things that it has the concrete inherent potentiality to become. And then the question is, well, it does need sort of some of the things that the apple tree needed. It needs nutrients but wait, there's this whole other dimension. It needs affection and approval and some kind of, guidelines for what's good behavior and bad. And that's not just my own imposition. It's like, well, for it to become realized in that potential, it needs this kind of discipline in order to press it to the greatness that it has. My wife and I have this, sadly gone blind in the last 6 months, with this long-haired miniature dachshund named Ugo in our lives. And man, if this little creature has not been one of the greatest gifts of life, it's just amazing what he's been for us. And so, it's not nothing what a dog can become, right? But it doesn't just happen. It's not, we all know lots of misbehaved dogs. Maybe they were abused or neglected or whatever. So this is a very important point. The realization of potential is not inevitable.
Right.
Most, acorns don't become oaks.
Right.
And so, but that potential is concrete. Like somebody has the potential to become this and not a that.
Right.
So we talked about Appleseed, talk about the puppy. You say, well, apples are not uncomplicated. Try gardening if you haven't done it. It's like, all right, that's a thing. It's work. It takes ingenuity. You got to know what you're doing. Then go to the puppy, for example, more complicated, but you get the point. It has a potential that it needs certain conditions to realize. All right, well, let's now move up to, the baby, the human child. Well, it's another whole level of complexity because, how would you put it? A dog, compared to a dog, a human being, and again, I know this is a reductive argument, but what does it have? It has a self-aware agency, a self-conscious agency that its own nature requires it to realize. So you can't have a human being, I don't know, let's say, that just can become fully itself while always only being told what to do. It has to become an actually actively self-determining entity.
Yes.
And that's not a, that in itself is something that, well, how do you do that? And so, all right, so we're at the point of now saying human beings are unique. They have a given potentiality. Its realization is not inevitable. All right, well, what are the conditions, given the range of human agents and their potential, that seem to be generally required for the realization of their unique and different potential? And in a short conversation, we're not going to get to the bottom of that, but I think we can probably agree on some basic parameters. Certain level of peace is important, right?
Nonviolence.
Hard to learn to play the piano or become a responsible parent if everything's in complete flux and you don't live until you're 17.
Yeah.
One has to, I think, talk very seriously about the family, because that's going to be the particularized way in which, how do I get a range of conditions that are unique to me, that are right for me, maximally right for me versus, my cousin or neighbor or someone across the country. Well, you have to have a delivery system, so to speak, that is particular to that agent. And that delivery system has to have the knowledge of the particularities which are ultimately, for which you can never have without optimizing the conditions for healthy families. And so that's going to be an absolute bedrock. But then how do you do that? And what are the incentives and structures and so on of that? Beyond that, I would say societally, it's very important we do have an actually diverse range. And that's where we come back to college. We have way too many people going to college. If it was possible for most of the people whose names we know from history to become what they were without going to college, it can't be necessary now. And in fact, if you look at the high investment and the low returns that many people get from going to college, we need to blow that whole thing up. We need to, and I don't mean actually blow things up. I mean, metaphorically. So we need, it should be possible to as it is for, and we know in the tech world, we know this clearly, right? You can learn to code or master something very well. So we need to have pathways that of self-education, pathways of maybe religious education, pathways of apprenticeships where industry itself is part of that. I don't really want to do that. And you go, and generally, I think we should be far less worried about ill-adapted credentials that, the credentials that are making noise but not actually delivering genuine market signals. And what we have with university degrees is a very, very approximate, low-value signal of what exactly. I mean, it doesn't even mean you know how to spell or write a sentence to have a degree at this point in time. And it might be high value if you went to a place that's known to be difficult and you did, I don't know, mechanical engineering. It's like, well, that probably is a pretty serious signal. But if you're over here and you did this, it's like, it may not be a signal of anything significant. So what I'm saying is simply this, is that we at a societal level, we need to have the confidence to have a significantly robust and diverse range. You will not realize human potential if there's only one or two let's say, pathways you're allowed to go on. So I
Right.
think we need a far more diverse range of pathways. And then beyond that, we need structures that say mediate meaning. And what I mean to say about that, and then I'll stop, is like human beings can handle a lot. We see this from Viktor Frankl. You see this from, imagine anyone you've known who had a hard life but still found meaning in it. Well, but you need to have the horizon of understanding so that difficulty can become meaningful. And that can certainly has come historically through Christianity, Judaism, through the great religions of the world. They provide the stories within which we can understand ourselves so that we can find and redeem meaning from within difficulty. But it ultimately comes down to awakening a human being to his or her own intrinsic, that's to say, in you, relation to a horizon of transcendent reality. Truth, beauty, goodness, love. These are the things, meaning is not simply a construct, right? Like a meaning were a construct, there'd be no meaning crisis. Like I just go, it'd be like printing money. Of course, that turns out not to work either. But I just go home one
Probably
weekend.
contributes as well to the meaning crisis.
Exactly. No, exactly. You just go home one weekend and make a whole bunch of meaning and live on it for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
That's not how it works.
Right.
Meaning is only ever found in relation to things that you really believe transcend yourself, your wife, your children, your country, the beauty, whatever. So I do actually think that at the heart of the meaning crisis is the nihilism that denies the reality of the high order goods, only in relation to which meaning can be found. And so I think we do need something of a revolution or a rediscovery, a reawakening of the mediating structures, whether it's community, civic life, beauty, the arts, healthy, simple day-to-day family lives. That's an enormously meaningful thing. Service of country, the transmission of the highest and best to anyone and everyone around us. These are all things that young people should be inspired to think they can make an impact in. And so that's where you might say the formation of the young in places like colleges circles back into the wider question of the realization of human potential. But I think broadly speaking, these are the elements. Again, there are no doubt many others. This is not meant to be an exhaustive account. But I think these are the kinds of thoughts we have to be able to think in order to have a serious conversation about what it means to have a culture in which human beings can flourish.
Yes. It's great. Great unpacking. I want to share, if you just give me a minute here to try to unpack this, share a perspective on this. I think there's some parallel here. This is kind of the libertarian viewpoint. And I'll go back to what you said, how we are all different, but also all the same, right? And that sounds contradictory, of course, but it is true. And perhaps by way of metaphor, you could look at something like evolution by natural selection, right? The algorithm of evolution is quite simple, right? If it works, keep it. If it doesn't, discard it, right? That's basically the process that's running in all organisms all the time. Now, so that's the process of evolution, but the products of evolution, all of us and all the animals and all the life forms, are infinitely diverse, right? Not only in the species, but like the individual organisms of the species are infinitely diverse, unique. And even if they are exact clones, no two exact clones go through life in the exact same context, right? So there's an infinite, combinatorial explosion of relationality, no matter what, when you're looking at the products of evolution, but there's a deep unicity and oneness in the process. And so, and again, trying to use that as a metaphor for what you were describing, that we're all the same, we're all different. And that's biological evolution, right? But to your point earlier, we as humans have something unique in that we have in parallel, we've created cultural evolution. And it's equally, maybe not equally, I don't know. It's very important. I don't know if it's built on top of biological evolution, but for us, it's equally important as biological evolution. If our culture is not evolving in a way that serves human flourishing, then we indeed will regress, right? We could look at the Dark Ages and other periods of history. And so as a libertarian, I think the angle I arrive at is like, okay, we want these fundamental laws like that guard the process of evolution such that we can support this infinitude of diverse products, basically. This could be businesses, institutions, languages, ideas, technologies, anything that culture can bear. And so at the heart of that, I see it's just life, don't hurt people, don't kill people. Liberty, don't restrain people for no reason. And property, let people keep the things that they own and don't steal from one another. These are like the core, basically, that protect that algorithm of cultural evolution that then enable us to maximize all the things: innovation, standards of living, productivity, the carrying capacity of the planet, cultural development, flourishing, all blah, 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 blah. And so I just wanted to share that with you and see what you thought about it, because it sounds perhaps overly simplistic. I could be criticized as an idealist, but again, these are things like the algorithm of evolution. These are things we've discovered over many centuries of experimentation. Life, liberty, property was codified in the Magna Carta in 1215. So it's we've had it for 800 years. We're still struggling to implement it. We keep going back and forth. We implement the Fed in the U.S., so we start printing money and violating everyone's property. And before you know it, we've got woke schools and institutions all around us. So I don't know. What do you think about that metaphor, and how does that land for you?
I like it, and I agree with it fundamentally. One of the just astonishing facts of the present is the widespread, it's not a very nice word to use, but widespread ignorance about what the conditions of human life and human flourishing are. Mm-hmm. I sometimes tell the story, in 1983, my parents moved from Alberta, Canada, to bought a kind of fixer-upper farmhouse, 8.5 acres that I grew up on for the next 10 years. I was sort of 7 when they moved in Prince Edward Island, Canada. Anyway, they bought this fixer-upper, and there had been an addition put on the front of this old farmhouse that my dad wanted to open up into the rest of the house. And so it was Mother's Day, 1984, if I'm not mistaken. He's a big guy, 6'5", strapping and strong, took out the sledgehammer, and he wanted to remove this wall that was dividing the addition from the main house, and just smashing this thing to bits, And anyway, so there was a post in the middle of that wall, and he was wailing on this post. And anyway, as it started to give way from the roof, from the ceiling, the ceiling began to sag on the first floor, and he realized obviously that he'd hit a load-bearing external pillar of the house. Of course, he stopped and called in a contractor, and they put a steel beam in to replace that next week. The reason I sometimes like to tell that story is because there's a simple takeaway, and that is if you don't know what the load-bearing pillars are, you might knock down the whole structure by mistake.
Yes.
Now, I think there are nefarious actors doing very bad things at any time and place, and we got lots of them around. But there is also a very serious level of ignorance of what the very most basic, what's holding up this house? Right. Well, life, property, and liberty. These are 3 of, maybe they're not exclusive, maybe it's not just those, but those sure as hell are 3 things holding up this whole thing that keeps us safe, that allows us to to live lives that we hopefully can be proud of, that allows us to do the things that are in us. You can't do that without those things. And so we're living in the kind of, this late stage moment where many, many people have, and it's not just that they don't know that, but many people think those things are in fact a threat to human realization. And so it's worse than, we just kind of forgot that, we needed to keep fire as a thing so we can stay warm. It's to the point where they no, put them all out. And so, wow.
That's a great point. So just the like what immediately, this will be short, sorry to interrupt, but
not at all.
You hear late stage capitalism all the time, which properly understood is just life, liberty, property. But it's like people are blaming central banking, coercive structures, violations of life, liberty, property, basically that should not be tolerated. They're blaming life, liberty, property for the consequences of violating life, liberty, property, right? It's actually late stage central banking or whatever you want to call it. And so it's like you properly diagnose the situation, but then you perfectly improperly prescribe the solution. You go the opposite direction you need to go.
Yeah. No, I think that's very well said. And it's a very, very, very big problem. I mean, we're literally living in a moment in which many young people think that freedom of speech is a threat to minorities.
Yeah, that's...
And, that would sure be news to, I don't know, Frederick Douglass.
Yeah, right.
I mean, the fact is that it's only minorities who need freedom of speech.
Yes.
Because if you think what everyone else thinks, you're then the majority, well, no one's going to stop you from saying it.
That's right.
And so the whole argument for a kind of absolute tolerance of minority positions is the bedrock of the protection of those minority positions.
Yes.
And so, of course, this is just
all the way
free
down
speech 101.
To the ultimate minority, which is the individual.
Yes,
right? Like
exactly.
anyone can say whatever they want. And it's a protection against violence again.
Exactly.
Let us resolve them in discourse rather than violently.
Yes, it's a protection against violence, but it's also, I think very importantly, so it's protection of violence. It is a protection of, you might say, the dignity or inalienable
humanness, personhood,
possibility or protection of my being me.
Yes.
But also very fundamentally, it's the principle that ensures that the majority can have the benefit of the thing they might otherwise have shut down.
That's right.
I mean, imagine life without the minorities that are through their unique perspectives, experience, whatever. I mean, so what I'm trying to say is that it's not just that we're living in a moment in which people they mistakenly believe that free speech is a threat to minorities, when in fact it's the very thing that secures their agency, their voice, their ability to participate. But the consequence of that is in fact that we all are denied the exchange that takes place when you are able to have a safe exchange of the things that through your own prejudice you would otherwise be blind to. So one of the key conditions for human realization has to be that you have the mechanisms that maximally overcome innate prejudice. Because prejudice is just like, going about life with your eyes, that kind of negative prejudice. I don't mean discernment, like this is better than that.
Right.
But I mean just rank reactionary, this is different for me, so I don't like it.
Yes.
That's like going about eyes with like your ears plugged or your eyes shut. Because what you're doing is you're artificially limiting the inputs that you would otherwise have, the data you would otherwise have to navigate things.
You can't learn what you already think you know.
That's right. That's right. You can only, that's right. Learning in a way begins with, Aristotle has a wonderful phrase where he says, now I'm probably going to misquote it here. And
I always just paraphrase.
But effectively that knowledge or learning, I've forgotten how it starts, but begins in wonder.
Yes.
And so that
Philosophy, I
curiosity.
think they say begins in wonder. I forget who said.
Yeah, I think it's
Socrates.
philosophy. It must be philosophy.
Yeah.
Here I am president of a college, and I can't remember that wonderful phrase by Aristotle.
But it is that
I think
horizon.
it is philosophy begins in wonder.
Yeah.
And it's that, but what does that mean? It means that philosophy, which is that searching into the deeper answers or explanations of things, begins with a simple state of like, huh, or wow, or look at that. And so there's a, what I would like to say about that is that there's a sense in which that's a stance of a kind of humility.
Yes.
Of something you're like, I don't understand.
Exactly.
That's amazing, but I don't understand it.
Yes.
And then that leads you to, because you have this amazing dynamic in the intellectual life of the necessity, the dual and simultaneous necessity of both humility and courage.
Yes.
Because you can't, if you think you know everything, it's like, well, there's nothing to learn.
Yes.
So you're not going to learn anything. So you need humility to be like, what do I know?
I don't know.
Hey, what can you tell me? I don't know that. That's a stance of humility. How does this work? Can you help me understand this? Hey, do you know how to get to this place? That's a state of humility. But it also takes courage. First, it takes courage to be humble. It takes courage to say, I might look stupid. You know, I remember the president of the college. I didn't even remember how that phrase of Aristotle started. But you can look stupid, but you have to have the courage to admit what you don't know.
Yes.
But also the courage sometimes to say what you do, right? Because that's what you owe to others.
Yes.
Because if you say, oh, I don't know.
Yes.
It's like, well, you can say, well, I'm not sure, but I think if you do it this way, this might. So it takes this simultaneously both humility and courage to optimize the search and exchange.
Yes.
Of the search for and exchange of the information that will enable us collectively to know and discover and live as well as we can.
Yes, that was wonderfully said. What was coming up for me there is like that balance between the humility and the courage is like you're ultimately trying to find I want to say the courage, but we're using this word, like the courage to act in the face of the unknown continuously, right? It's like you've got 1 foot on order, 1 foot in chaos, to use a Petersonian surfer analogy. And it's like, that's the sweet spot. That's the middle way. That's where you need to be. And it's, don't be so humble that you just don't know anything, right? And don't be so certain that you're a totalitarian. Be somewhere in the middle and have the courage to make your unique contribution, to voice your contribution. And it's, it's an incredibly difficult balance to strike. And it's not a product. Again, it's not a state that you arrive at. It's a constant place that you're trying to adjust toward. And it does seem to be the essence of philosophy, right? It's like begins in wonder, right? Kind of beyond that horizon of our understanding. In beauty, somewhat perhaps too, that, beauty kind of tends to be that first thing that really captures us or gives us that sense of awe. And then we can start to map it with our epistemic structures, our knowledge structures, language, etc. I also like how Peterson has described that, like the artists get there first. They portray the thing imagistically. Then the poets come along and they'll write about it, but it's not literal writing. It's very expansive. You're using words to evoke an experience, not to like deliver some propositions or arguments. And then it gradually gets distilled further and further until it becomes like more rigorous scientific knowledge as we're accustomed to. And that seems to be how we deal with that horizon of wonder, that there's an infinitude of unknown around us. And we're just trying to like grow the garden slowly through this process.
Well, and I think that raises a really big question, because we can talk about these things at the sort of civilizational level, but like, how do we actually do this? And to me, this is a, to be like sort of personally frank about this, man, like life is complicated. Like
absolutely,
it's complicated. It's difficult. It absolutely resists dogmatism. any single human life, any single day in anyone's life faces a kind of, infinite complexity.
Yes.
And so, I think one thing I find interesting about this whole question of what it means to live as, like how do we live?
Mm-hmm.
And how is like you can have an insight, like, we can say in the context of a, of the gift of a conversation like this.
Mm-hmm.
You've just helped me think about something you just said. I've never thought about in just that way. And then that's a gift of an insight. But then what does it mean to operationalize
Right.
that?
Put it into action.
Yeah. What does it mean? What does it mean to be to operationalize the habits? Well, habits are operationalizing, obviously. What does it mean to have the habits that can make you into a self-correcting entity?
Yes.
And that must mean something like having habits of a certain humility, certain gratitude, a certain self-introspection, but also certain self-care, a certain nourishing of the soul, the mind, a certain care for those around you. What I mean to say is just that I think one of the things and one of the crises or problems in our moment is that we're sort of bereft of, we've lost touch with the wisdom that earlier generations through enormous suffering came to, whether it's about, I don't know, how to live peacefully with our neighbors, how to navigate the relation between the sexes, how to have a peaceful polity, all these things. But even at the most just microcosmic level, what are the habits that will enable me to live day by day such that I can understand as well as I can myself and my life, so I can live as truly as I can today and in the future.
Yes. And in a way that hopefully inspires others to imitate. I mean, at least your children or your loved ones or those who you do have influence over or could have influence over. Like, you're cultivating those virtues not only for yourself to have this conformity to the truth of reality and your own human nature, but also hopefully beyond your own life to inspire that cultivation in others. And that's something, again, back to the university, that's what we've gotten away from. It's like we've somehow shifted to this, all we need to do is get a lot of propositions in between our ears and everything will be okay. And we've gone away from the conscious cultivation of wisdom and virtue. It's like, these are the ways to be, right? I think Aristotle said something like, it's the purpose of knowledge is not to know, but the purpose of knowledge is action, not knowledge, basically. Like, if you can't operationalize the insight or the idea, then what good is it ultimately? It might be fun to think about, reflect upon, write about, read about, maybe, but the real significance comes in the way it reconfigures our patterns of action. And, propositions and arguments, like, that's all well and good, but you can't leave wisdom behind. Like, that process seems even more fundamental, I think, than just the scientific enterprise.
Yeah, and I think one thing that is important here, Robert, is that, so you use the word virtue. Like, well, what is virtue? And are all the virtues the same? Is there a hierarchy of virtues? You talked about how liberty, property, and life are pillars of civilization that works. So at some level, they're adaptations, right? They're adaptations in relation to reality. And, you talked about evolution and biology, survival of the fittest and so on, which he had we're just in the midst of actually releasing on the Ralston College podcast last year's Sophia lectures. We have this annual series of lectures. And last year they were given by Brett Weinstein and Heather Hying.
Amazing.
I know you've had Brett on the show. Anyway, it's very interesting very, very interesting things in those lectures. One of the things that comes out is, I think it was in one of Dr. Hying's lectures, one of the things that comes out is that as you move to more complex forms of life, the complexity of communication and of the kinds of reciprocity increase. So you get ever more complicated and more profound layers of exchange, let's say.
Sure.
And what that seems to mean is that just as we do not invent the laws of physics, like evolution has to take place subordinate to or in relation to, adapted to the laws of physics, or it's not happening.
Of course,
because that's just that's the nature of the reality of the rules of the game. It appears as if reciprocity is at some level adapting to the nature of reality itself. And so when we talk about the virtues, I've been thinking about what some of these, what these images of, let's take Christ on the cross as the most famous, extreme example of self-sacrifice. Jordan, our friend Jordan Peterson, talks beautifully about voluntary self-sacrifice as the kind of the essence of taking responsibility and the highest meaning and purpose. That's a very deep comment. Anyway, all I'm trying to point to here is that, if you think about what does it mean, because people will often imitate bad examples. You can have an abusive parent that, that multi-generational cycles of abuse or neglect are very sad but difficult to break precisely because of the way in which they're formative one to the next generation, like dominoes. Not to say they can't be broken, but the realistically they're very difficult. It's very difficult to reform those, and it takes a redemptive intervention that is able to provide liberty from this destructive pattern that transcends it and enables the person to will a higher a way forward. What does it mean? Like, a question I'm very interested in is, what are the great examples for human virtue and behavior, and what does that mean about the nature of what's real? That it's a little bit like you said, how if you're in Greece or in a great cathedral or something, sometimes they seem to whisper at you from a wavelength from the past. I mean, Plato has this idea of recollection, which is to say that you're discovering something that maybe you already intuited, but you didn't know. And so anyway, what I'm trying to say is that what are the examples, and this, I could even draw this out and ask, could answer this personally. Like, what are the most meaningful examples of how to live in your life?
Bitcoin custody is evolving. Onramp is pioneering a new model, multi-institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure and adds fault tolerance to your setup. With Onramp's multi-institution custody, your funds are auditable on-chain, cannot be rehypothecated, and can only be moved with your explicit direction. Multi-institution custody simplifies private key management, providing unparalleled peace of mind for you and your loved ones. Onramp also helps you seamlessly tap into financial services like trading, inheritance, loans, and more, all without compromising on accessibility. So schedule a consultation with the Onramp team today to learn more at onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove. Again, that's onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove. One of my highest health priorities is keeping my brain in top shape. To take care of my brain power, I do many things, such as striving to read, write, exercise, and meditate daily. One of the latest tools in my brain power toolkit is Mind Lab Pro. Mind Lab Pro is a nootropic supplement that is scientifically proven to enhance your brain power. When I take Mind Lab Pro, my mind feels like it has a better grip on the world, my thinking is more lucid, and the articulation of my speech is radically improved. MindLab Pro has been tested in rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled human trials and has been proven to enhance brain power for users in every age group. MindLab Pro is an advanced formulation of 11 nootropic ingredients and is backed by research from over 1,400 human trials conducted over the past 32 years. So if you're looking to enhance your brain power, MindLab Pro is an excellent solution. Go to mindlabpro.com/breedlove to start enhancing your brain power today. Again, that's mindlabpro.com/breedlove. It is such a broad question because I immediately go into, I think in childhood, it seems like our parents or our immediate caregivers, those who we are physically interacting with, you cannot help other than mimetically inherit their patterns, right? And, it starts out with again, parents, caregivers, becomes friends as you start to get older and kind of broaden the social circles. And that's all an unconscious process. I've noticed it, maybe as you age, you become a little more of the old dog that can't learn new tricks kind of thing. But definitely when I was younger, and I could see it in others as well, right? I had a friend that would go to Canada for the summer, and we lived in Tennessee. Most people talk kind of redneck-ish. He comes back, and all of a sudden he's, I can't do a Canadian impression, but he sounds Canadian basically. And it's that's just
Poor
3
fella.
months. Yeah. something A. 3 months in Canada, the kid's 8 years old or whatever, right? That's a pretty significant portion of his life up until that point. He comes back and he sounds different, So I do think that there's an unconscious process of imitation that we're all subject to probably forever, right? I think we're doing it even right now as we converse. We're trying to put our minds together and we're seeing things from different perspectives, looking at the world through one another's eyes. And there's something so important to that because that is the magic of being human. That, again, reality is so vast, infinitely complex. We look at it through a very narrow aperture. But if we can develop languages, mathematics, money, etc., other things through which we can interpret signal through the eyes of others, then we can get a much larger grip on reality and how it works, right? So there's that's going on at kind of a very basic biological, physical interaction level. It's unconscious, I think, and this is where studying René Girard's work on mimetic theory was so valuable to me personally. It's I don't want to say I was able, but I became more conscious of that unconscious process. So then I become much more selective about who I spend time with, what do I read, if I'm going to engineer myself mimetically, now I know sort of how this process works. I can be more thoughtful about it. There's that, but then there's this whole other domain of the mythological, the role you brought up, Christ, I put Socrates in that category, Buddha for many people, that I feel like we need those figures and those stories. Regardless, people always want to argue about the historicity and is it true? Is it not? Is it, is it a fable? Is it not? Is it an adult fairy tale? Is it not? I think the historicity almost doesn't matter. We need these archetypal stories and archetypal figures like Christ that meet all of the worst things in life in the most virtuous possible way. It's he becomes the ultimate parent or something like that, right? That we can all model our moral codes, our legal codes, etc., around his orientation, his response to the world. And, so love thy neighbor as thyself, love God above all else. And again, God, I always say this because I had a more atheistic kind of, not upbringing, but orientation when I was younger. And so people like Peterson were able to speak to me about God in a way that made sense, which was through more of a scientific lens. You could just interpret the word God here in a non-theological way as the word for all that which is beyond words, right? All of that vast, infinite complexity we haven't mapped yet with words or mathematics or anything. Like, you could just use God as the placeholder symbol for all of that. Okay, to love God above all else is like to love and respect. It's almost like it's almost a restatement of philosophy begins in wonder. It's like you're just saying, like, there is a horizon of the unknown that we're always going to be dealing with.
Yeah.
And I need to love and respect that fact. It's in the other too, right? Like, you can never, the moment I think I know you and have you completely figured out is the moment our relationship completely dissolves, right? It's like, it would be disrespectful to you. It would be arrogant of me. It's the mystery is like what mutually bonds these things, if that makes any sense. So, I guess the shortest answer to the question is just like the virtues or principles we have discovered through these mythological role models that have succeeded in the marketplace, right? Christ, Buddha, and again, doesn't have to be theological per se, because I think Socrates fits the bill too, right? We use the Socratic method. It's encoded in us now culturally, and the way we're doing right now, like the way people are open to hear other people's points of view and like to descend from a dialogical engagement to like punching someone because you don't like what they say, or, you know, taking to an extreme. God forbid, we just had Charlie Kirk assassinated, like an extreme example of that. Like, he's practicing the freedom of speech, the Socratic method, the open dialogue, right? And then someone degenerates to physical force and murders him or assassinates him. Like, that's what we don't want. If we want a world that's socially cohesive, that's moving forward, that's optimizing for human flourishing. So,
well, see, what I think is wonderful in that reflection is that it actually brings out that there is a kind of metaphysical hierarchy or ontological hierarchy.
yeah.
It's not like even all the virtues are equal. So let's take, you know, just to make very practical and personal, you could say, well, in this person, I maybe say, take my grandfather or something.
Yeah.
He was a hard worker. Say, okay, well, that's an important virtue. I see, you know, industry creates value. But then you might say, okay, well, but imagine that all that hard work, the difference between, well, what was it for? Well, he just really wanted to be rich and, you know, wanted whatever possessions. Okay, well, good, he got that. Mine didn't particularly, but just this hypothetical. Imagine that as compared to, he just loved his family so much, or his community. Right. And you think, well, that's exposing a horizon of another, like of a higher order virtue. Like, why is this one more celebrated than that? Right. And then you could say, well, not only that, but they live for those principles even when it costs them.
Yes.
You know, I don't know, everything.
Right.
Or their own you know, wealth or stability they were willing to risk in order for the well-being of others, or the safety of others, or the productivity of others, or whatever the case may be. So what I mean is that as you stack these things up, you can see that there are, like, if you imagine someone who has this virtue, but, well, that's actually just, imagine playing cards and it's trumped. That's good, but this is even more valuable.
Yes.
And then actually that's good, but that would be an even higher form of the admirable trait. So what I'm trying to get to here is that there's actually an objectivity to the hierarchy of value.
Yes.
That it's not simply made up or contingent or cultural or whatever.
Absolutely.
Because it's revelatory. You might say, yes, it's pragmatic because it works.
Yeah.
So that's one way of looking at it. But you can also say, well, it works because it's made in the image. It's made. It's in imitation of, or in conformity with what's real.
Yes.
That hierarchy is itself So you might say the hierarchy is sovereign over the structure of reality, or
Yes.
it is the structure of reality.
Yeah, it's, you know what else occurred to me there is you were kind of in that hierarchy going from the products closer to the process. You know, it's like, oh, well, just wanted to be rich and have the stuff. Okay, well, that's just accumulating the products. There's some virtue to that for sure. You're being productive, right? You're presumably solving problems for people and running businesses and whatnot. But now, if it's no, I love my family. It's, you know, I'm embodying certain virtues that I want my children to also embody. Now you're getting closer, you're away from the products and closer to the process. And that, if you take that process all the way up, it's like, I think we are almost imitating God or nature, right? Like that nature is this, what does Lao Tzu say? Something like, nature never rushes, yet nothing is left undone. That is this constantly generative, self-emptying kind of thing, right? Like, look how much abundance is just, you know, there's so much creativity. The whole thing is creativity, right? The stars, the earth, everything. And so I think, yeah, maybe we move up that ontological hierarchy the more we come into conformity with a reality that we're just one wave in the ocean or one, you know, phase in the sequence of humanity. Rather than being narrowly focused on ourselves and I just want to be rich and have a bunch of stuff, I'm able to pull back that aperture and say, no, how am I relevant to others? How am I doing this?
So true.
Yeah.
What a beautiful and difficult insight.
You go into the domain of process philosophy, where it's like everything is process ultimately.
Yeah, and I mean that has to be true at some fundamental level, right? Like that the first principle, so to speak, cannot be inert. It's not a formula. It's an activity. It's an activity. And so what that means for us, in a way, it's not simply what you. I guess what I'm trying to say is, what does it mean to bear yourself, you know, without respect to your own striving and ego and a kind of immediacy? But what does it mean to be as adequate as you can be in your time and place to what really is highest and best?
And that is a difficult question to answer, right? Because there's a lot of discovery that has to take place for that to happen. The ikigai term comes up, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with that Japanese concept. It's something like a 4-circle Venn diagram, ikigai being the intersection of these 4 circles. You know, what does the world need? What are you good at? What do you enjoy doing? What can you get paid for?
Yeah.
When you can find the intersection of those 4 circles, like that's your unique pathway to go and do what you're describing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's completely right. And it's also, it's interesting because one of my contentions is that many young people, particularly in the kind of middle and upper classes, so to speak, who have some optionality in life, you know, they're not, I don't know, just constrained by immediate necessity to immediately get out there and get a job or whatever. One of the dynamics that I observe in that sort of, in my experience at least, in that sort of population, that demographic, is an enormous pressure to instrumentalize their own lives. Like, you know, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with that? Well, why would you study art history? What are you going to do with that? Why would you study, you know, philosophy or even economics, whatever? And the problem is that it pressures young people into giving premature answers.
Yes.
But answers that they think sound good.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, I'm gonna work at a finance firm, or I'm gonna become a doctor, or whatever the situation. Those are all good things to do. I'm not criticizing those professions. The problem is that it forecloses the process by which you could actually discover what you are, such that you could end up in the place where you could be maximally valuable or meaningful or productive or whatever. And so, because the problem is that, and I think this is really, I've come to think it's a really important point, is that is that, if you only ever do things, so what that incentivizes is only doing things that you think you know the consequences of. So if I study this, then I can become that. Right. Well, the first is that you don't know what, you know what the hell, you don't have no idea. That life is so complicated. You have almost no idea what will come out of your action.
Yes.
Right. And even when you think you know what will come out of your action, your window, your understanding of the future, which is effectively, as a friend of mine said, the knowable future, or the foreseeable future. He said to me once, "What is that exactly?" It's nothing. You get no insight into the future. You might know the principles.
Yes.
The deeper of a thinker you become, the better you will grasp the principles of reality according to which the future must unfold. But that literally doesn't give you anything in terms of the concretely whether this or that will happen.
Yeah.
That's just a game of probability, which is not knowledge. And so why am I saying that? Because the first point is that even those things that you think you understand the consequences are already only at the tiniest segment of what's really going on. My example is always that in summer 2006, I was in the middle of my doctorate, needed to learn some German to pass my German exam. My college, generously sent me to take an intensive German course at Middlebury College in Vermont, which specializes in intensive language programs as it happens in the summer. So I thought, well, I'm going to do this course, generously funded by Emory University and Middlebury College. And the purpose is, the instrumental reasoning here is I do this and then I will know enough German. And if I know German, then I will pass my exams. Well, as it turned out, all that actually stacked up exactly as I had envisioned. And all that happened. Well, why am I telling this story? Because that was the least important reason I went to Middlebury in the big picture, because it was there that I met my wife, future wife, I should say. There you go. And so I had no idea that what I'm saying is that first we have what we understand about the future is so little with respect to the richness and capaciousness and complexity of it. But that's the first point. The second point is actually in a way more important, because you might say that should lead us to humility with respect to, even when we think we're doing, why am I here? Why are we doing this? Well, we have an idea that maybe it would be productive conversation, so on, but we actually have very little idea of what might come out of any. That's right. Any interaction between two human beings is always infinitely richer and more capacious than you can possibly imagine. Because you don't know what the synergies, possibilities, modes of connection. So you always have to go into things with intention on the one hand, but with a kind of humility about just kind of listening, thinking, well, wait, what's really going? What's here? And thinking and being careful about it and treating it with a sense of not provisionality in the sense that you don't know anything about it, or this person you're not sure they matter if it's instrumental, but just a humility with respect to what you need to remain open to. Yes. But the second point is actually more important, and that is that if you only do things you think you know the consequences of, the first point being you don't even know what's inherent in the actions you think you understand. The bigger problem is you will never do or follow anything, the consequences of which you do not yet think you understand. And the problem with that is, at least in my experience, the things that are most meaningful in our lives, the vocations, the possibilities, the big loves, the big interests, the big defining understandings of yourself and of the world, who you are and what you're meant to do. Yeah. Those big things almost always start as intuitions and whispers and I think, I think I'm kind of interested in this. And then you're like, well, what are you going to, if the answer is, well, what are you going to do with that? Yeah. Well, the thing is, you're never going to do anything because you think you have to give an answer to something you don't even understand. Yeah. And so, you might not ever, because the thing is that I find really interesting is that it's not like you only ever have enough, if you're lucky, enough light for the next step. It's not like, you start listening to these deeper wavelengths and suddenly your whole life becomes clear. Looking back, you can understand, that led to that, led to that. But it's a bit more like, I don't know, you think, Okay, you're feeling all this pressure. You know, something like 75% of students at Yale, this is a statistic I've heard, don't know if it's true currently, but it's a huge number, at some point think about studying finance.
Of course.
And so, because that's the mimetic rivalry, or you think you get in, maybe you will get a job, maybe you won't, whatever. But that you see why there's that pressure there. At a minimum, we can say there's vast pressure and incentive for people to study certain things pertaining to the financial system and so on. And that's a good thing up to a point. The point I'm making is that it may be you think, well, I don't even like this. Like, why am I doing this? And then you think, well, what are my options? How do I discern and discover like my own path in life? Like that's a big freaking question. And the best I can come up with is you have to listen, and you have to have the courage to actually trust that the deeper voices, you know, and again, not just existentially, I'm going to do this, but considered, careful, you might even say prayerfully over time, the ones that persist, you should listen to them and follow them and see where they go. And you might say, well, actually, I've always you're embarrassed to admit it even to yourself. I've always wanted to be, I don't know, take it, a painter. And say, well, you can do something about that. You can go out and start, taking some lessons or getting some whatever. And you might, by going down that pathway, you might go off and become a great painter. But it might be that by doing that first step, that first tentative sort of tendril of a step, you realize, you know what? I'm not a very good painter. I don't particularly like painting, but holy smokes, I love color. I am so good at color. And then you realize, I don't know, one thing leads to another, and you say, you start an interior decorating business, and you think, now this is really, I can manifest this insight I had and this talent that I didn't know I had, because if I had never started trying to paint, I would never discovered I had this talent for color. And then maybe along that journey, you realize I'm really good at color, but you know what? You know what I'm really good at? I'm really good at running this business. And we've got other people who are even better at color than I thought I was. And so then, you along the way are sort of discerning and discovering the things that you didn't know about yourself, and then finding the value that you're able to center in more and more on where you can provide. There's a correspondence between the value providing for others and the unique abilities and talents that you alone have to offer.
Well said. Well said. I don't know who said it, but the meaning of life is to discover your gift, and the purpose of life is to share it with the world.
Love that.
And you have to have that. It is a very courageous step, because not only will you have your own internal resistance, oh, let me take the safe bet and go be an investment banker, right? Which, by the way, I know a lot of investment bankers. I don't know any of them that ever like their job. I mean, they've made a ton of money, but most, I shouldn't say all, but most don't like it, right? It's not a very creative thing, basically. To resist not only your own internal resistance to going with a riskier bet, let's say a riskier path, a less sure path, but you often also will encounter a lot of social resistance as well, right? Your parents or your friends or whoever, like, what are you doing? Go over here and make $1 million a year. What do you mean you're going to be a painter? What is that going to do for you? So you have to have even more courage than just enough to overcome yourself, but also to overcome this other social pressure that will try to prevent you from walking that path.
Yeah, but I think there's another really interesting part of that, Robert, and that is that it's quite important to think really rigorously about risk. No action is without risk. And it's sometimes the risk you're not aware of that can really take you out, right? So you say, well, based on what we know about the economy, this trajectory is a safer, probabilistically speaking, a safer bet.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Let's
say learning, I don't know, finance rather than becoming a painter. But okay, let's just say that's true for all the ways in which it might not be true, right? It actually maybe turns out that the advice people were giving for the last 15 years, just learn to code. Turns out that was fantastically bad advice for most people, because now it turns out that artificial intelligence can code most, whatever at the level or better than most people, and so it turns out actually that was
tech is shrinking that foreseeable future that was zero. is now like getting even closer to zero because of the acceleration of tech.
Yeah, exactly. And so you've got that, but you've also the fact that maybe this calculus we're making is not true, but let's just assume it's true. I'm talking about risk. It's less risky from the point of view of your financial future in the abstract to do this rather than that. But like, what the hell are you? Like, what is the risk of taking on a career that you don't like? And actually, if you don't like it, you may not be very good at it, or you may become someone who's seething in resentment and anger and frustration and unrealization. And then what good are you?
Yeah.
And then it's like, well, what is the risk that you will turn into a miserable version of yourself because you didn't have the courage to listen to the things that would have led you into perhaps a less rich, you don't even know that, but a more yourself version of the future than the one that you chose that was less. And that's why I think one has to be really, this is why you need actually like humanistic, or let's call it philosophical, or just it's kind of a very practical form of thinking about, what is the value to you of living a life that you want to live? Well, it's pretty hard to put a value on that. That'd be about the most valuable thing. So actually, one thing I say to our students is, when people say, well, what are you going to do with that? Humanities education. The assumption is that's coming into a hierarchy of value conversation in which what would be valuable would be to be able to show the way in which something was of use. And you could say, well, if you could say, well, I'm going to become a coder, or I'm going to become an investment banker, that would seem to be, okay, I think those are valuable things. Good for you. But what I want to say is, actually, let's pull back the veil and have a real conversation about where the value is. So if we say, okay, well, what are you going to do with that? All right, well, let's stop the tracks. Let's stop the press for a second and say, well, that question presumes it presumes value in terms of, a usefulness, right? So this is useful for an end. Okay, fair enough. Fair question. Why would I spend my life, 4 years of my life, or a year of my life doing this? What's the use of it? Well, let's peel back, let's think very honestly and seriously about what it would mean to be useful. Well, usefulness is always defined relative to an end. So, this microphone is good for recording a conversation, but it's not very good as a flotation device, right? I mean, this table's good for holding things on, but it's of limited value as a communication device or whatever. Things are always, your washing machine is good for washing clothes, but not a very good security device. Things are always useful relative to a purpose, right? Okay, so then the thing is say, well, what is the highest purpose? What would you think of the thing that would be most useful for the most important thing? And I would say that's something like the thing that human beings would most value at the end of the day, like the fin du compte, as the French say, is something like what I call passing the deathbed test. So, you're 80 years old, you're dying, you're at the end of your life, your children, grandchildren, to just imagine this. It's not a sudden death. It's happening. And, the question is, did I live? Am I happy with the life I lived? Did I live the life I had in the way I should have lived it? And I really don't think there's a more important question to any of us than that. Of course, so everything stacks up to that. If you have money, it's because you want to enable certain things that you value even more than you value the money. So then the question would be, all right, well, what would help you attain that end? Because whatever that thing would be that would enable you to be best able to secure that end that now you will value more than anything, that is the thing that would be of most use. And, well, certainly with respect to our students, that is what we're trying to provide them. So these things that seem, that's why I say I'm trying to do the same thing with risk, same thing with value as I was trying to suggest with risk, that there's moments where we can domesticate these actually fairly unsophisticated and actually downright wrong notions of risk, where it's like, whoa, the bigger risk is that I just become a miserable version of myself. So, okay, I'm willing to take a risk on the financial future for a minute at least, in order to have a chance of holding the whole picture of risk better in a way that's actually less risky to what I really value. Just as what I say to our students is, when we're thinking about what are you going to do with that kind of bitchiness, the question is actually to turn the tables and say, well, what are we trying to do here in this life, in this planet, with the one life we have to live? Because that's the thing I want to do as well as I can. And what I hope I'm doing here is acquiring the tools that will enable me to do that thing that I most value.
Amen to that. The deathbed test, such a clarifying frame to put on every action, every decision, right? Like, and not that it's easy either, right? Like, there's things earlier on in life that you might think would give you the satisfaction on that deathbed that will be completely absent or transformed, 10 years later. So it's obviously a process. I think you're spot on. What I would add to that is, like, anyone that maybe is struggling to accept that, go find there, for me, interacting with a few people that were extremely financially successful, but utterly miserable. Like, that was enough for me to be like, oh, like many people.
Wait a second. Wait a second.
Like many people coming out of school, it was like, oh, I just got to make a lot of money and that's going to be the thing. And then we're done here, right? And then you see it and you're like, oh, wait, they have a lot of money and they have a lot of this and they have a lot of that. But, and not to say that to have money is to make you sad. There's also people that don't have as much money that are very happy, because typically it's relationships. At the end of the day, like at this stage in life, it does seem like the older you get, the more you care and the more your world is centered on your family. And now that could be, you can take that as broad or as narrow as you want. Like you could, again, if we're thinking in Christic terms, it's like we're all one big family, right? So you can make a contribution to the world that improves the human race without having any children, and still like be playing that,
definitely,
let me love my family game,
Definitely.
And so, it's very important, man, because like there's so much emphasis and pressure on people to like just go out and make it financially, but it is not the answer. And if you don't do those things, like you said, listen to the whispers and follow your heart, or however you want to put it, then the money will only amplify the disappointment in yourself. You'll get 20 years down the road and be like, fuck, I made $100 million, but I hate what I do and I fucked up my marriage or whatever.
And you may be less likely to make the money you need to provide for the things that you most value, because you're alienated from the thing that like you've got. Like you've got whatever. You've got limited things, but they're not nothing, whatever they are.
Yeah.
And if you lean into those, it's very odd. I've known people who made careers. You think, I don't know. I was talking about my friend and colleague Joseph a little while ago. Who would ever have thought that leaning into learning ancient Greek would be?
Right.
And yet he's one of the most talented, and he's a generationally important teacher.
Yes.
In Western civilization, I believe that.
Yeah.
And so you might. What's odd is that because you don't know you don't really know so little about the ultimate complexity of reality that you can make really shallow dismissals and think, well, I could never. I don't know. I'm interested in. I don't know, wine or apples or the printing press or grandfather clocks or I don't know. I'm trying to think, just reach for like things that you'd think that's not going to lead you anywhere.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know how valuable that subset of knowledge is for those who want someone who know how to fix that thing or know how to provide that strategic insight for a business at that moment in time because you went deep into this thing that you were just really curious about.
Yes.
So it's like it has also something to do with surrendering yourself. It's something like providence to the goodness of reality. It means somehow giving yourself over to that. And relative to this question you were just raising of like, relationships, and in a way it's a question of like, what does it mean to live without regrets? I think a very good way into that, and one that convicts me on a daily basis, but I use as a heuristic or kind of metric, is just to ask, like, if I died today,
Right.
what would my regrets be? Like,
Yeah.
you know, there's my eulogy. You know, have I loved, you know, have I been sufficiently true to the things I most value?
Yeah.
And you know, and that always for me, and I think I'm not alone in this, very often comes down to the center. At least one of the levels you're going to answer that question is in relation to the people you love.
Yes.
And you know, like that,
Oh yeah.
you know, or you can also ask, if I lived exactly as I have this year, today, yesterday, the last week, if I extrapolate that as a pattern into the rest of my life, and then I get 20 years more, 30 years, and then it's over, what are the regrets I'm going to have? Because it's a way of being honest about the present. And what's very interesting is yes, there'll be levels of accountability. You know, maybe I've got a talent that I'm not using, or I'm not really being honest with myself about this, or in this relationship. But it also is a way of cutting from the big ideas and
Yes.
you know, highfalutin talk or whatever down into where the rubber hits the road.
Yes.
And you know, ultimately I'm convicted at that level. You know, am I being kind
Yes.
and loving and patient with my wife, my friends? Am I attending
so
to
important.
these people that actually I say that I would give my
Yes.
life to, and
Right.
in a certain context, I think that I would,
Yeah.
unhesitatingly. And yet, is that stacking up at the level of how I'm living
Yes.
in relation day to day? I
Yes.
say I value these things. So it's a way of sort of implementing at an honest level the things that you say and actually may indeed actually think are most valuable.
It is, yeah, such a great point. And that so many traditions, I think, have zeroed in on this too, right? Like Stoic negative visualization, where you're like, you just imagine this is the last sip of water you ever have, you know, how grateful you would be for the last time you hugged your mother, et cetera. The whole idea of memento mori, right? Wearing, like, even there's a skull on this bracelet, and it's meant to be that, just a reminder, you're mortal, you're going to die. Like, what are you doing? I think it's tremendously valuable and useful. I want to just add one other thing that I don't know where I picked this up, but like also more recently, having become a father, thinking about each action or each trajectory in my life, like, would I want my son or daughter to be living this life? Right? The things that I'm doing every day. What if I had, you know, adult son, because I'm male, doing exactly what I'm doing today, would I feel like proud as his father? And that can also be clarifying. So there's all, you kind of get the absolute of death as a clarifying framework, but then there's also the vibrancy and the potentiality of life coming up behind you. And between those two buoys, you can kind of like really set your sights straight and hopefully do something meaningful and purposeful and true to your heart. So
I love that. I love that, looking forward and looking back.
Yeah.
There are different ways into confronting very practically, whether by your own standards.
Yeah.
You know, and you might say, well,
exactly. That's
no,
a
I
good
wouldn't,
point.
or yes, I would, or in these ways, yes, and in
Yeah.
those ways, no.
Yeah, that is a great point, that it is your own, like, it's not a test you can say, oh, well,
No.
the standards
No.
are always like, you decide. Like,
Yeah.
And again, this is you exercising your autonomy in a very deep sense, right? You're choosing which norms to bind yourself to and then acting accordingly.
Yeah.
So you're choosing your own constraints, and you're choosing constraints, hopefully, that render value into you and your heart and your preferences, but also render value into the lives of others. And so there's a very special place called the Farm at Okefenokee. It's a 1,000-acre regenerative farm community about 45 minutes northwest of Jacksonville, Florida. The farm is a completely off-grid community. It has total food, water, and energy independence. Everything on the farm is 100% organic, and it even features wild boar and bear hunting. The farm at Okefenokee is right next to the Okefenokee National Wildlife Refuge, where you can do camping and canoeing tours. So if you're like me and you're interested in the self-sovereign lifestyle, then you can get your own lot on the farm at Okefenokee if you tell them that I sent you. Once you get a lot, you can build one of 3 custom cabin options. So if you value freedom, self-sovereignty, and living in touch with nature, then join me and my family. We have lot number 21, and we're going to be building a cabin there starting December 2025. To learn more about the farm at Okefenokee, go to okefarm.com and make sure to tell them that I sent you. So this is one that I think about a lot and have talked to a few people about, but I have to hear your views on it. One of the most staggering realizations I've had in the past 5 years doing the podcast, going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, I'm not sure which, philosophizing too much. This idea that all language is metaphorical, essentially, that it is our physically embodied experience that is primary. And then from that, we metaphorize things into our linguistic or cognitive space, basically. So even like the one example I often share is like the word understand, which used to be understand in German, but became understand in English. It's like you're mapping the embodied experience of standing under something to get a deeper perspective on it. You're mapping that experience onto the cognitive experience of comprehension, basically. And so that's just one example of like how we map the physical onto the cognitive. The word meaning itself is a metaphor. And this one's so strange to me. We've talked a lot about meaning today, but in some way, when you write a meaningful sentence, right, the words hang together, the grammar and the syntax are such that it makes sense or that it conveys information or an insight, or if it's more poetic, perhaps it evokes imagery. And so we metaphorize that coherence of a sentence into a desired feature, something we want in life, which is like this coherence, this significance, purposefulness. And so the sort of 3 different meanings of meaning that I typically refer to are like, there's just kind of the raw informational sense of the word. There's the more intentional sense of the word meaning. Like if I, bump into you and say, I didn't mean to, it's like, oh, well, the outcome diverged from my intention. So there's something there. And then there's the more cosmic, significant sense of the word, such as when we ask questions like, what is the meaning of life, right? I'm not looking for like intention and outcome to be married. I'm not looking for the information necessarily. You're looking for like the purpose. Why are we all here, et cetera. So what are your views on, or another way to, I was going to say, what are your views on the meaning of meaning? Another way to ask that would be, how do you define meaning?
I love those layers and levels. Well, to begin with, I think there's something very interesting in the way you talked about meaning and metaphor and the way in which we derive meaning. We find meaning through metaphor. It's very, Aristotle says, if I'm not mistaken, here I am, hope I don't misquote him twice here in the same interview, but that, effectively what metaphor is showing 2 things that are unlike, showing the likeness of 2 things that are unlike.
Yeah.
So I say, your eyes are, like blue, like the sea or something.
Yeah,
It's not the sea, your love is not like the ocean actually, but I'm showing the likeness of these things.
Yes.
And so it's very interesting because this is really a bedrock of the way human understanding works.
Yes.
Is this, you get purchase on one thing through another, and there's a kind of interpenetration of all reality, so that each window opens up is a portal into the whole, and you have to have the particular thing in order to be able to see it as part of a pattern, and then that pattern opens up other things. And it's very interesting the way this works in language, so that language has its original meaning. I used the word fire recently. So the mind, following Plutarch, is not a vessel to be filled. Even to call the mind a vessel is already metaphor, but a fire to be lit. Well, no one's lighting the mind on fire, obviously.
Right.
You're not lighting the can't,
But you
are. It's like a powerful metaphor. And it's interesting that some metaphors are so powerful that, fire is a hugely effective metaphor in our in language, because there's so much. It's so capacious and powerful and transfers through domains. The Greek word. Another example of this, the Greek word for to watch a festival or something, to go watch something is theoreo. Like so you can see how this happens, right? So you're looking at the spectacle, you're taking in the whole of it, you're watching the play or the mountainside or whatever, but then that metaphorically gets transferred to developing a concept or a grasp of the whole. That's a theory. So theoreo to theoria, right? And so you end up but that's always the case, right? Like you need the part in order to then, like, these windows into the real, the way it stacks up between the particular and the whole, I think are very interesting. And there is no grasp on the whole but through the particular. So, and then in terms of the meaning of meaning, I think the best I can say is that I do have a profound conviction that meaning is essentially defined in relation to it's finding yourself in relation to something you value, believe is real, that transcends yourself. So I don't think that you can simply construct a solitary meaning, even if it's something you're doing like in solitude, I don't know, learning to play music or, mastering a field of knowledge or whatever. It's still the thing that, the music is outside of you, the knowledge is beyond you, or the field of knowledge you didn't invent, could be physics, whatever. So it's I think fundamental, and certain kind of pragmatic nihilists might say, "Oh, well, those things are just constructs." And yes, I know you find them meaningful, but they're not really real outside of you. Well, the mechanism still holds, even in the relation to that critique, that still meaning is only found in relation to things you think transcend you.
Right.
But also, I just don't think this passes the basic sniff test. We don't have to go through a long, philosophical, theological argument, which I think we clearly can show that these things exist independent of us in a way that is rationally known and definite. They're known far more certainly than the most scientific things are known, precisely because, well, as Freeman Dyson once said to me, the whole history of science is made up of things of opinions that people held very fiercely that turned out to be wrong. And that has to do with Aristotle's insight that we start with what is closest to us, like matter, but least knowable in itself, and we progress to things that are furthest from us, but most knowable in themselves. Yes. And so, all you have to do is know that, how our concepts of what the finest particle of matter have changed because we're always trying to get closer to it versus, 2 + 2 = 4. Right. We know that with a definiteness that we don't need to double check. Because axiomatically we know the principles of at the level of the principles of human understanding of mathematics, we know this is true. Yes. It's not an opinion. No one says, I believe 2 + 2 = 4. No, we know that. But so too can we come to know the existence of high order realities, goodness, truth, beauty, freedom, etc. These are not things that are opinions. They're not things you have to believe in. That may be a step along your journey. Like you can believe that 2 + 2 = 4 and operationalize that as a pragmatic belief that happens to be true without understanding that it's true. But you can also come to understand that is true. Yes. And one of the weaknesses of our whole worldview at the moment is that we've dismissed in advance the possibility of knowing the things that we can really know and that are at the foundation of the pursuit and discovery of human meaning. So I would say that it has to do with locating yourself in relation to a greater whole that genuinely transcends but also realizes you.
Well said. I think you also are kind of intuiting my next question to some extent. At least your answer resonates with the question I wanted to ask, which is the meaning in life literature actually says something very similar to what you just said. And basically I think it's just these two questions. I hope I'm not leaving one out. What would you want to exist even if you don't? And then how much do you matter to it? If you can find a good answer to these two questions, right? The thing that you wish to exist even if you don't, and then find a way to make a contribution to it or share the message about it or whatever it is, then that seems to be a pretty reliable pathway to cultivating meaning in life. And that sounded a lot like what you just said, actually. So I guess you're onto a good answer.
I like that.
What are your thoughts? And I guess getting more concrete about cultivating meaning in life, and just to share, like for me, when I stumbled across this a couple of years ago, I was like, oh, Bitcoin to me is that thing, right? It's like, this is thing that I really want to exist. I think it's massively freedom enabling for the world. And I just want to try and contribute to it. I made a decision some years ago. It's like, okay, I work for Bitcoin now. Like whatever that means, I'm going to serve this mission. And so I sort of just stumbled into that those dual questions basically. And so I'm just curious what you think about that. Is that a reliable pathway for people to cultivate meaning in life? And what have you found to be your answers to those questions?
Ooh, I love that. Yeah, I think that's a great set of questions. We always need a whole series of sets of questions because at different stages, different things will help move us along, further our grasp on ourselves and the world. But I like that because it's interesting. The first question, how does it go?
The question is, what do you wish to exist even if you do not exist?
Yeah.
Basically.
See, what I think is interesting there is that it's something you're acknowledging that has, something you admire or think is true or important, quite apart from whether you exist at all. But also the fact that you love that thing tells you something about yourself.
That's right.
Right. So, I don't know, for someone might be, number or math.
Yeah.
Else might be human dignity. It might be beauty and architecture. It could be any number of, things. Could be my mom, right? Could be anything that you're like, no, this is something that
Yes.
And it's also.
Boy, that's a profound answer right there, actually. Mom. It's like, well, obviously you want her to exist. If you die, you still want your mom to exist or your child or any of your loved ones. And then how much do you matter to them? I was like, that almost cut to the crux of the, I don't know, this relationality being primary to meaning in life.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and how much do you matter to them? Actually, one of my brothers, I come from a big family, two beautiful sisters and 7 brothers.
Wow.
So
That's
one
a
of
big
10.
crew.
I'm the oldest of this crowd. And anyway, one of my brothers, won't get into his story, but he's a creator of things and makes films actually. And in particular, one of his specialties is documentaries of a certain kind. And you set out on the pathway to make films, or one of my other brothers is into music, and my sister's is a very gifted poet. And anyway, you can get into these things, the unlikeliness of, making these things succeed. And then you can, bend yourself out of shape because you so want this to happen that then you start instrumentalizing this and that. You have to hold it all together in one way or another. But my brother, who is in film, he said to me once, he had a breakthrough in his own kind of vocational direction and in integrity and clarity of what he was doing that I found very helpful, Robert, at this level. And what it really came down to was the people he was making these films about, that it was about them. It wasn't about him. And it's been really interesting to me through all the thick and thin and difficulty of being a filmmaker at increasing levels of distinction and so on, is that that's been a through line for him of clarity, that it's like he's realized that what he has to offer is not for him.
Mm-hmm.
He's known this since he was young. But you could say, oh, I want to be famous. I want to go to the Oscars. I want to do this. I want to do that. It's like, no. That's a high order answer to that question. It's for these people that I think have a calling to tell the stories of. And in his case, it's people who are particularly in the unsung heroes of the people whose lives are beautiful and powerful and illuminating, but who's no one's going to otherwise tell their story, or unlikely to, or whatever. And to be personal, in my own case, people say, well, what would you want written on your tombstone? It's another way of getting at this question. Right. What is the thing that you would like to be worthy of if you could be worthy of it? For me, it's, I believe that human beings matter, that they matter infinitely, each one as an individual. And, sometimes give I talked about the what does it mean to see a horse in full gallop, or a bird in full flight? What does it mean for a human being to be fully realized? And sometimes feel that, human beings are, each one is like a Stradivarius, like an incredible instrument that is only one of them. But they don't, you have to know how to play it. Like, what is the thing that enables you to play, as it were, the music or the song that's in you that only you can sing? And so for me, I like the thing that I hope persists outside of myself, and that I would like to give myself to, is the living awareness that people matter, but in not just as an abstraction, like you read in a book, people matter. No, but that of what I believe in most is the awakening, the bringing people to see that they matter, and that they matter not just in a momentary or instrumental way, but on a kind of eternal plane.
What a beautiful gift to give. And so many people hungry for meaning, hungry for belief in themselves, hungry for purpose. And it is ultimately within, like, you are the meaning. Like, this quote from Alan Watts is coming to mind. I cannot even begin to paraphrase it, but it's something like, people are running around looking for meaning as if they were a sentence or a word. It's like, you are, the meaning of life is to be alive. You are the meaning. And so, yeah, that seems really important. And then also on the other side of it, maybe we could temper the atrocities and temper the warfare and temper, like, it really, and I think this is a core value of Western civilization. I don't know how well we've actually embodied it, or we've distanced ourselves from it, but like the idea that the individual person has higher sovereignty than anything else, right? Except God. It's like God and the person, basically. That's really important. And it's not just important in like some kind of, not just ethical, moral sense, but for the Darwinian reasons we were talking about earlier. Like, we don't know who's going to come up with the thing that's going to advance the human species. We don't know who's going to invent the next refrigerator or whatever the thing is. So it's like, we need all of the rolls of the dice, the term we used earlier, that we can get, right? All the shots at the goal we can possibly get. And that is every living person and their unique set of skills, their unique life path, their unique context. And so it's extremely pragmatic as it is extremely moral, ethical, righteous.
Yeah. The simultaneity of those things is very interesting.
Yeah.
That it is true that coercion, broadly speaking, is immoral because it's violating the innate autonomy of an individual.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also true that it's inefficient.
Mm-hmm.
It leads to suboptimal outcomes.
Yes.
So again, what it seems to point to is that some kind of free self-developing reciprocity is the nature of things.
Yes.
And so it's bad to violate that because it's wrong insofar as those things have their own innate dignity or character that you are violating. It's also wrong because it leads to bad outcomes.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. Okay, last question here. I want to ask you this. We've touched on this, so this might be circling back a little bit, but this idea of developing the right conditions in society, in ourselves, in the world for freedom of speech and the freedom of exchange. And as you said offline, you know, it's all about cultivating a high trust society. And I shared with you then, I'll share it again because I don't think we did this on camera. That word trust is such an operative word. It's etymologically related to truth. Also to like betrothed, like the idea of having a sacred union. Yet it is so tricky because I feel like there's two different versions of trust. There's interpersonal trust, like, you know, do you trust the person to do what they say they're going to do? And then there's like, do you trust the structural integrity of a bridge, you know, or like trust some mathematical solution to a problem in nature, right? That you can you get closer to verification, I guess. And this is a big issue in Bitcoin. We say, don't trust, verify, right? You try to basically minimize the need for interpersonal trust, which is another way of saying, how do we reduce the cost of producing trust? And if you can lower the cost of production of trust, then you can increase the aggregate production of interpersonal trust, basically, right? So if you have a monetary system like Bitcoin, for instance, that's self-auditing, self-governing, incorruptible, well, then we don't need to trust 7 guys at the Fed to manage the money supply, right? We can all get along a lot better and on a lot more level playing field than we otherwise could. So we've lowered the costs of creating interpersonal trust and thereby increased the amount of trust in society. I think religion is another kind of example of this, where it's like if we share the same religious norms, values, then we're more likely to effectively go into business together or go on some expedition together, right? That we develop rapport, basically. And so I want to hear you expand upon that idea of like, what does it mean to create a high trust society, and how should we be thinking about this in like a very practical sense? Because it's not just, I feel like even if you didn't subscribe to anything I just said about the economics, it's not just like, rah, let's all trust each other. Like there has to be some incentive. There has to be some structure. There has to be some cohesive structure that's getting us into trusting relations with one another. So how do we create that high trust society? If you're a Bitcoiner, you need the Orange Club app. It's where you can connect with other sovereign individuals locally and globally. It's great for when you travel to meet local Bitcoiners, to go to Bitcoin meetups, and to discover local merchants that accept sats. No distractions, no noise, just real Bitcoiners. So download the Orange Club app today and find your local Bitcoin tribe.
Wow. Gosh, you saved the best for last. It's such a good question. And you've obviously thought very deeply about this. Maybe take a couple of different tacks into it. The first, and when we were talking offline, I was mentioning that at Ralston College, we're a place where we have an absolute commitment to freedom of speech. One of our 2 models, Semper Liber Vita Ipsa. Free speech is life itself. And that is because you can't have a college worthy, or university worthy of the name, any institution about knowledge in which you don't have an absolute commitment to freedom of speech, because freedom of inquiry, which is what your freedom of speech is enabling.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
So it's not. It's the mechanism according to which you can have untethered conversation and pursuit of truth. Obviously, and one could say more about that, but that you can see pretty easily why that is an essential principle or condition of a place that is devoted to seeking the truth. What I have found really interesting as we've gotten this college off the ground is that it's not a sufficient thing to have a protection of free speech. The protection of free speech is not a sufficient condition to have a culture of genuine free exchange. So you can say, all right, these are the rules. You're allowed to, broadly speaking, engage on any topic with anyone, anywhere. None of that means on itself that people will actually do that. Here's another example. In the United States, we've got the First Amendment. Obviously, there's no risk. It's very constitutionally complicated to overturn or amend the Constitution. It seems a very remote possibility that the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States would be eliminated or overturned. So we have very, very strong constitutional protections of freedom of speech in the United States. And yet, here we are in an age of cancellation, fear, a suboptimized exchange. We had the whole, situation around repression of information and so on and so forth. And so what I mean to say is that the legal, let's say, or formal protections of freedom of exchange, freedom of speech, I'm not downplaying them. They are necessary conditions, but they're not sufficient. And so then the question becomes, well, what is sufficient? What makes an environment a genuinely fertile place of exchange, not just one that in which, from a sterile perspective, you could exchange the information, you're free to do so, but you're still not doing it because something else is getting in the way. And I have found, as so often is the case, thinking about this very personally and practically is quite effective. And so, let's just imagine you have, just a physical possession that you really value. It's a watch your grandfather gave you that was given on his 50th anniversary by his grandmother or whatever, or it's a pearl given to you, it's a pearl of great price given down to you for the generation, something you really, really value. But you're, I don't know, it's a time of war or difficulty, or you're going on a long journey, or, and you have to entrust that thing you really value to someone else. Well, how are you going to go about selecting the person that you're going to entrust that to? Well, it's going to be someone that you trust, right? And so the same is true of, okay, you're asking me directions. It's a low investment thing. I can just give anyone directions, right? It's like that. There's nothing about that exchange of knowledge that requires particular trust, provided it's like, how to get to the 7-Eleven and not how do I, get the nuclear codes. But you see what I'm saying? It's a low stakes exchange. So we don't have to have a lot of trust for that. But it's not no trust. We have to be living in a place in which I may let someone get close enough to me, they can hear what I say, so I actually believe they're not, a physical threat to me. So actually there's all these layers of trust that are already embedded, even in that relatively low trust, low stakes exchange. But let's imagine something that really matters to you. It's your innermost hopes and dreams, or I don't know, it's some mistake or sin you're carrying, or like something that you're seeking to be free from in your own soul. It's like something that really matters to you, because it's like, this is holding me back in life and I don't have anyone to talk to about it. Are you just going to go talk to anyone? Like someone random on the street? Like, no, because this is something that's a really high value to you, but also vulnerability. Because trust is effectively a high level of trust is effectively an index of someone's trust is an index of your ability to hurt someone. So, the very fact that we're here in your home means that, you trust me not to be, I don't know, packing a pistol. I'm going to, pull out and, murderously assault you or whatever. There's already And that's why, actually, and it's very interesting that the greatest story of betrayal comes from someone, it's in, of course, Jesus and Judas.
Yeah, of course.
The greatest story of betrayal has to be the person who was maximally trusted, because it's the person who's maximally trusted who has the knowledge and closeness to betray you.
Sure.
And so all that is a long way of saying that what we found at Ralston is that, yes, of course, we need legal or formal protections of freedom of speech. And we're just not up for people who don't want to participate, that they're not a fit for coming to this community. But to really make it a place that we're actually having the conversations that we want to have about the things we consider most meaningful. Like, I want to talk about this because it matters to me. That the premise of that is a community of trust. And so then, the question is, well, how do you create that? And trust functions according to different rules in different contexts, and it's we could get it. We'd have to spend another 3 hours just on that. But certainly, relative to where we are, we have we're very intentional about setting the conditions where that can be created. So we talk about the need to build trust at the very beginning of the students' time with us. There are, we follow the Chatham House rule, which is to say you can certainly talk about conversations you've had with other people, but you don't mention that someone in particular, this person said this. You might say, I had a conversation the other day in which someone was arguing this point, but you don't tell them who it is. So you're protecting that person's privacy, because it may have been a valuable exchange, and you're protecting the possibility of that conversation being meaningful by not sharing it with someone that they don't yet trust. And so that's what the Chatham House rule is. But there's also, this is a simple thing. Our students are not massively on social media typically, but one of the customs that we've adopted is that you don't post something online without someone's consent. So, and it's never been a problem. But if you imagine that one of the things holding young people back is fearfulness about their action in the world, because they think anything at any time that they do can immediately be shared with the entire world because someone's got the camera out or the whatever. It's just, we say, no, not even by accident. It's not going to happen. And in fact, this group of people is not particularly into that whole realm of the virtual in the same way as maybe some others are. But the point of the matter is that you're establishing the rules of the game in advance so people know. But I think you've asked a question, a very hard and difficult question that I've not by any means sufficiently answered. And you talked about Bitcoin as the thing that as a way, in a certain sense, it makes trust unnecessary, right? Because
not entirely, but I would say because obviously you'd have a perfect monetary system, but still, when I invite you over for a podcast conversation, that doesn't prevent you from being some murderous psycho, right? So there's still levels of trust, but you don't have to. The power to print money is like, the absolute power that corrupts absolutely, something like that. You don't need to trust someone to not print the money anymore. Yeah. You just kind of thrown that ring into the fires of Mount Doom or whatever the Lord of the Rings fiery mountain was. So I would just say it lowers the cost of establishing trust. And this is based on, it's not my original thought. This is based on the work of Nick Szabo, who actually defined money as the trust minimized asset. So it's like the thing that society knows, like if I give you a gold bar, you're like, okay, we're good here. I don't need to hear, it's like you've paid me. You've put your money where your mouth is. So now, whatever you paid me to do, I can now do, right? You've paid me to do it versus, hey, go build this house for me and I promise you when it's done, then I'll give you gold or something. Then you're in a trusted exchange, right? Whereas if I pay you the gold up front, you're in a trust minimized or trust less.
Yes,
exchange.
and you've thought way more about these things than I have, but it is interesting that, it is. That's why the whole point about verification is very important.
Exactly.
Because there'd be no such thing as counterfeit, and the whole history of the attempt to counterfeit money, if it were not that there's some level at which currency depends on trust.
Yes.
That is to say, the trust that this thing that you're giving me is this thing.
Yes.
That's why, people are, it's interesting that Dante in his Inferno puts the counterfeiters of money quite far down in hell, precisely because they are undermining a trust
Yes.
that is really fundamental
Yeah.
to the reciprocity of exchange of a healthy community.
Yeah.
And
Above
so-
only the betrayers, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm trying to
above
locate
only-
exactly what circle they're in, but it's
because Judas and the betrayers are
at
always
the very bottom, exactly. Because it's a betrayal, you might think, well, Dante saw perfectly well how important the trust in currency is.
Yes.
Because once we have that, all kinds of things get unlocked
Yes.
in terms of human behavior. And so I think that it's very, as with all complicated and deep, sort of rich realities, it's really multi-sided. So on the one hand, you need to have all kinds of things that you don't have to verify.
Yeah.
Right? That's very, very important. You don't want to be wondering, like, is this Advil when you go to Kroger or CVS and you buy the Advil? You want to think, is this really ibuprofen? Can I trust that?
Right.
That's a bad situation when you get to that point. So you need to have the structures that maintain trust. And that's one of the things I think we've seen, particularly post-COVID, is that, insofar as we had people charged with the responsibilities of maintaining structures and systems that we all depend on very, very, very heavily, betray our trust in those things. You see what a mess it makes, because it's not like you can go out there and just start verifying everything for yourself.
No, you can't.
That's a very
The cost is too high.
The cost is too high, and
Yeah.
you may not have the ability. You may not even have the knowledge to verify whether this is ibuprofen or whatever.
Sure.
And then you start paying more money for it to go to a trusted place, and because
That's right.
But so I think we actually are interestingly living in a time with the, let's call it, the abuses or the betrayals of systems that look like they're low trust systems, or like they don't need trust. Like I don't need to know the guy who produces the sandals I buy, or I don't need to know the details of the place in China that manufactures this thing that I am using over here. So that's the whole point about a distributed marketplace, in which you don't actually even need to know the people. You have no idea. The buyer and seller have no connection to each other at a level of individuals. That's a brilliant and beautiful thing of an economy that certain structures make possible.
Yeah.
But I think we're also seeing that we've put a lot of trust. Those things are dependent on high levels of trust in those systems.
Yeah.
And you can't ultimately, I think, have a productive society or culture that is only putting its trust in these, call them like super, transnational or whatever structures that don't stack up into layers of trust that you can verify. So you might say, like, there's an interesting, like, human beings are not abstractions. And so I don't think you can live a life effectively that is removed from the layer in which you act, the context in which you actually live. So at some level, the level of resolution of your trust, at some level, a deep and non-delegable, inalienable level, is, do I trust the people in my life, in my house, that I give my soul and heart to on a day-to-day basis, that I work with? And I think what one would find, and I think this is the meaning crisis is related to that, that is to say the dissolution of our civic structures, or civic thickness of community, and community groups and various things. The more people live in virtually, which is a realm that's much harder to verify because of anonymity and various things, which may be good in certain contexts, is what it's done is it's put human beings, which frankly are just not evolved to live in virtual environments.
Yeah,
like we are people who can have very high levels of sophistication of what it means for me to look into your eyes or to see your body gestures or whatever. And we can build on that over time, build enormous value based on relationships that we develop in high trust ways. I mean, it's very interesting that there's a study done on people who sing in choirs. Apparently, it's probably a small scale study, but it is an interesting outcome, which is that are more likely to trust, to engage in trusting ways with others, and not just with people they sang in the choir with, but actually they know something about what it means to like dance collaboratively with other people. And so I think that we needed, as always, an interestingly and paradoxically double-sided movement on these things that are not ultimately opposed. I would say that probably there's a relationship between the bottom-up structures where we know we can verify high trust ways, and we have ways of like soft, penalizing the people who break the rules because like you don't have them back over for dinner or whatever. So you have I bet you there's a relationship between the structures that emerge out of and depend on bottom-up trust, community, family, whatever, the local thickness. The health of those, I'll bet you, is related to the health of the higher order ones, in which you can be like, yeah, we can trust that this is Advil in the container. Yeah, we can trust that this, I don't know, multinational, whatever, is ultimately stacking up in some way. And I think it's interesting that our distrust of the abstract, whatever, transnational or international or, these regulatory, bodies, the distrust in those is also simultaneous with the perception or the actual deterioration or loss of thick trust environments on the ground. And if I had to choose, I'd choose the one on the ground if I had to choose between them. But I suspect that it's a both and or a neither nor. That you can't have one or the other you can't have a healthy country if all your community, that's just quite apart from the multinational whatever things. There comes a limit to what I think can ultimately be safely done because of the particularity of the way in which reality unfolds. You ultimately need structures that are responsive to that particularity in the moment, which is why there's no one-size-fits-all education. It's why families are not scalable to 300 people and all of this. You have to have levels that stack up from the particular to the local to the this to the that. And I think it's quite important that human beings put their major investments in, or at least are rooted in, not just that I'm only for my community, because you might write a book or have an invention that is actually, of global or national importance. But what I'm trying to articulate is that I suspect that we can't hope to get any of the higher, so to speak, or more abstract levels right, whether it's state or country or, bigger than that, if we haven't first gotten the level in which we all live,
the local
day to day,
embodied,
as right as we can.
Yeah, that's a beautiful point, and it goes straight back to metaphor. It sounds like until you get that embodied, enacted, physical experience locked in, then you don't have a foundation from which to abstract. Yeah. Although they're mutually interdefining and interpenetrating, and your ideas shape your actions, and your actions shape your ideas. This one's a little more primary, right? Because you have to exist in the physical world. You don't need to use English, for instance, necessarily, right? We could all just be cave people. So anyway, that's a really interesting framing. And it's jogging another thought for me, but I guess I'll share it with you at dinner. It's just, I don't know. All right, I'll share it just in the interest of the pod here. It's like, tell me if this is a good metaphor or not. It might not be. I hope it is this late in the pod. The idea that we have so many different languages, natural languages and dialects spoken all over the world, yet everyone in the world speaks the same mathematical language. We all use the Hindu-Arabic zero-based numeral system. That's very important. If we all use different mathematics, like there would be no global trade, there'd be no global cooperation, probably a lot more warfare. So it's like you kind of need, I don't know that we need I guess we probably do need the diversity of natural languages and dialects, right? It kind of goes part and parcel with the diversity of culture. But you also need, just like you said earlier, right? We're all different, but we're all the same. We need to celebrate our diversity and have our differences. In this metaphor, that would be natural language and dialects. Yet we also need some unifying field in which to interoperate for really important things like economics and economics. We'll just leave it at that. It's a pretty big one, right? Also the transmission of knowledge, the scientific enterprise, all of these things depend on mathematics being constant and reliable and verifiable. So we need both,
Yeah, and it may even be that we need these different languages, just like we need different customs at different places because they are adequate to the experience of that group of people at that point in time in a way that others would not be. But it may also be that some languages are superior to others at the level of what they're able to offer us into the nature of human experience, into the nature of the world and reality. And that's not to say that other languages don't matter or have their own unique value
and different purposes, right?
But they may not be as adequate to certain kinds of tasks, problems, grasps of reality, and so on.
Yeah, I think like German comes to mind, right? Like it's so much of the great philosophical, intellectual literature is written in German. Yet it's not, I would say if you want to read poetry, you should probably go read it in, I don't know, Arabic or some more romantic language. I don't know if Arabic's a great, I don't know. It's like there's different languages suited for different purposes. Yes. Whereas you still need that one language that's universally agreed upon so that we can get stuff done, basically.
Yeah, and it may even be that there's a metaphor or an analogy at the level of the concept for what you're describing as the language of mathematics, and so, which that is clear and true that there's a universality to the mathematical that does not depend on us, but that which we have access to. So somehow the structures of our consciousness, structures of our minds, allow us to tap into or are somehow in the image of or work according to the same rules as these truths that manifest in reality. So there's a correspondence there. But maybe it's the case that math is not the only thing for which that is true. And though there may be different words for things in different languages, perhaps some languages like, for example, Greek, is an enormously powerful language at the level of what it is able to help us understand about reality, superior to other languages, while other languages may have their own strengths. Again, I'm not actually a relativist. I think some things are just going to be more robust tools that have evolved in different contexts. And, thank goodness for us that we get access to those things. But the point I'm making is that that's why, again, you see the correspondence. Like, it's not that it's either particular or it's universal, or that there's a war between the particular and universal. You can only understand the universal by really understanding a particular. Otherwise, it's just an abstraction that has no life. And so what I'm trying to say is that it may be that the deeper you go into the revelations, the epiphanies that a particular time and place, tradition, language, account of things, the deeper you go into that, the more you get at the, let's say, what it's disclosing about the nature of reality itself. And so I suspect that this conversation is an example of, though neither of us, there's all kinds of, most of the world's languages neither of us has any knowledge of. We're inheriting concepts from different traditions, different moments in our history that we were not present in. And what that, to me, seems to speak to is something like the universal intelligibility of reality itself. Let's call it the logos, both the outside of us and within us.
Yes. Beautiful. Just beautiful. Yeah. The word beyond words, right? Was it seeing infinity in a grain of sand and feeling eternity in an hour? Like that whole idea of just, the more you zoom in, you're also kind of looking at what's out. And again, we're back in metaphorical domain, but it's all, there is a structure common to the whole thing that's connected as one thing somehow. So it's super fascinating. Stephen, this has been an awesome conversation. I knew it would be. Yeah. My mind feels like it's exploded a few times, so thank you for that.
We left it all on the table.
Yeah.
Left it all on the microphone.
Where can people find out about you, your work, Ralston College, et cetera?
Well, insofar as at Ralston College, we have a website, www.ralston.ac. We have a newsletter that advises people of our podcasts and public lectures and things of that kind. The admissions actually for the Masters in Humanities, for which full scholarships have up until now been provided for every student. We hope we can keep that up for a while. In any event, those admissions to that program are open now. If you're interested in that, check that out. I've got the usual, well, not all the usual. I've got a couple of ways I'm out there, mostly through the Ralston podcast, and here and there. But come by Savannah and introduce yourself. If I would say to your listeners, if they'd like, conversation is the one thing. Whenever we can get it, whenever we can make time for it, I at least am always up for.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
We lock our doors, we encrypt our hard drives, and we use strong passwords. But most people leave one thing wide open: their phone line. SIM swap attacks are one of the fastest growing methods of digital theft. In minutes, a hacker can clone your accounts, reset your passwords, and drain your life. Unfortunately, this is not science fiction. It happens every single day. Efani is the only mobile service protection designed exclusively to protect you from SIM swap attacks. Efani offers military-grade encryption on their product and offers up to $5 million of SIM swap insurance. And to date, there have been exactly 0 SIM swaps on any of Efani's over 50,000 protected accounts. So you don't need to live in fear, you just need to protect your weakest link. Go to efani.com/breedlove to secure your phone line today. Again, that's Efani, EFANI.com/breedlove. For the past 25 years, I've been reading roughly 1 book per week. Almost entirely difficult nonfiction books, the kind that really shift your thinking. Books on physics, money, power, psychology, spirituality, and philosophy. The real stuff. But I get it. Most people don't have time to read 50 books per year. So I hand-selected my favorite nonfiction books and distilled each one of them into a course that you can take in 50 to 100 times faster than it would take you to read the entire book. Each course gives you the key insights, mental models, and frameworks that matter. We launched with 15 book courses, and we are building toward a library of 100 by the end of year 1. So if you are a seeker of truth, wisdom, and personal growth, then my book course is for you. To sign up, go to course.breedlove.io. Again, that's course.breedlove.io. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money. And be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.